Lift that rug now, Annie shouted as she rushed into the study, gripping a silver tea tray with both hands. Richard Whitmore jerked his head up from the stack of financial reports spread across his desk. Tea trembled near the rim of the cup, but Annie managed to keep the tray level. "Calm down," he said. "What are you talking about?" Annie hurried across the room, placed the tray on the nearest corner of the desk, and pointed toward the floor beside his chair. The edge of the red Persian rug disappeared beneath the heavy oak desk. "Please stand up and lift that rug right now. Hurry." Or, her voice caught before she could finish. Richard remained seated. He looked at Annie, then at the hand pointing toward the floor. "Did you just give me an order?" Annie swallowed. She knew that one wrong sentence could make him dismiss her before she had a chance to explain. "Yes." The direct answer made Richard pause. Annie had worked at the Whitmore estate for 3 months. During that time, he had never heard her raise her voice. She was always polite, completed every task assigned to her, and rarely entered rooms that were not included on her cleaning schedule. Yet now she stood before his desk with fear written across her face, refusing to lower her hand. "If you wait any longer," Annie continued, "whatever is under there may be gone before midnight." Richard closed the folder in front of him. "What is under there?" "A box." His expression shifted slightly. "Did you open it?" "No." "Then how do you know there is a box?" "I saw one corner of it through the gap beneath the hatch." Richard leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me there is a hidden hatch beneath the rug in my study, and I know nothing about it?" "That's right." "And you discovered it while cleaning the floor?" "One of the marbles rolled to the edge of the rug. When I bent down to pick it up, I noticed the rug had been put back crooked. Most of the floor beneath it was wood, but there was a strip of metal beside the desk." Before Richard could ask another question, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Vanessa Whitmore appeared in the doorway wearing a dark green dress, with a light coat draped over one arm. She entered with her familiar, composed smile. "Are you finished working? I thought we could take a walk before dinner and discuss the foundation event." Richard glanced at Annie. "I was still working until Annie rushed in, started shouting, and insisted that I lift the rug." Vanessa turned toward her. The moment Annie met her eyes, her hands began to tremble. She clasped them together in front of her apron, trying to steady herself. Vanessa looked at Annie, then at the tea tray, and finally at the section of rug beside Richard's desk. "You rushed into my husband's study, shouted loudly enough for the entire hallway to hear, and ordered him to lift that rug." Her voice remained controlled, but all warmth had disappeared from it. "What exactly are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to stop someone from taking what is hidden underneath it." Vanessa's expression tightened. "There is nothing beneath that rug." Annie looked at Richard, then turned back to Vanessa. "You ordered the rug to remain in that exact position. You also made sure no one on the household staff was allowed to move it or clean underneath it. I was protecting an expensive antique from careless handling. There is a metal hatch beneath it." Vanessa stepped forward. "That is enough." Annie flinched at the sharpness of her voice but continued. "I also heard you speaking in the west hallway. You said someone was coming tonight to collect the transfer documents. You said the originals were still hidden in the same place." Vanessa's face changed for a fraction of a second. The surprise vanished almost immediately, replaced by anger. "You listened to a private conversation?" "I was carrying Mr. Whitmore's tea. You stood in the hallway spying on me, and now you have come in here to accuse me of hiding documents in my husband's office? You arranged the rug and whatever is underneath it." "Stop." Vanessa's voice carried through the study. "You have no right to stand here and accuse me. You are an employee in this house, not a member of this family. Whatever you think you heard does not give you permission to enter this room and speak to us this way." Richard rose from his chair. "Annie, do you understand what you are saying?" His voice had grown louder. Annie looked directly at him. "Yes, sir. You are accusing my wife of hiding documents beneath the floor of my study." "Yes. She is my wife." "I know. You have worked here for 3 months. Vanessa has shared my life for years. Do you expect me to believe an accusation like this simply because you saw a piece of metal beneath the rug?" "No, sir. I expect you to lift it and see for yourself." Vanessa gave a short laugh. "Richard, this is absurd. She could have placed something there herself." Annie's expression tightened. "I didn't." "Then perhaps someone paid you to create this scene before tonight's meeting." "No one paid me." Vanessa turned toward Richard. "You cannot allow an employee to storm into your private office, accuse your wife, and then tell you what to do next." Richard studied Annie. She was frightened that much was obvious, but she was not confused. She had not asked for money. made any demands, or tried to leave. From the moment she entered, she had pointed to the same place on the floor. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked. Annie answered slowly. "She said everything had been signed. She called you a fool and said you still suspected nothing. Then she said the original documents were hidden in the same place and someone would come for them tonight." Vanessa opened her mouth, but Richard raised a hand to stop her. "Did you record it?" "I tried, but I only captured the final part." Annie reached into her apron pocket. Vanessa immediately stepped toward her. "You will not play an illegally recorded private conversation in my home." Richard turned to her. "This is my home too, Vanessa." The words stopped her. Annie removed her phone but did not press play. Richard looked at the device in her hand, then down at the rug. "If there is nothing beneath it," Vanessa said, "you will be teaching this girl that humiliating me was justified." Richard did not answer. He walked around the desk and stopped beside the red rug. Annie stepped back to give him room. Vanessa remained near the door with her arms at her sides. The confidence stayed on her face, but her breathing had quickened. Richard bent down and gripped the edge of the rug. Before pulling it aside, he looked at Annie. "If you are wrong, you understand how serious the consequences will be." "Yes, sir." "And if you are right, then waiting any longer will be even more dangerous." Richard pulled the rug aside. A rectangular iron hatch appeared beneath the oak floor. Fresh scratches surrounded the circular lock. A torn piece of paper was trapped along one edge, and through the narrow gap beneath the lid, the corner of a steel box was visible. Richard slowly straightened. All color drained from his face. Vanessa said nothing. Richard looked at the hatch, then turned toward his wife. "You just told me there was nothing under there." Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. Richard walked to the desk and picked up the telephone. "Lock every gate," he told the security office. "No one leaves the estate." Richard kept the receiver pressed to his ear until the head of security confirmed that both entrances had been locked. He set the phone down and turned his attention toward the study door. "Close it." Annie moved at once. She shut the door gently, then stepped aside and remained near the entrance. Vanessa was still standing beside the bookshelves, one hand holding the coat she had brought with her before heading outside. Richard pointed toward the open space at the far end of the room. "Stand over there, where I can see you." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "You cannot be serious. I just discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floor immediately after you insisted there was nothing there. I have never been more serious. You found an old piece of construction beneath a rug. It proves nothing." Richard knelt beside the iron hatch. Thin, fresh scratches surrounded the circular lock, suggesting that someone had recently worked at it with a metal object. He gripped both edges of the lid and tried to lift it, but it rose only a few inches before catching. "Annie, open the top drawer of my desk." She hurried to the desk and pulled it open. "There is a small leather case on the right." Annie found it and brought it to him. Inside were several tools Richard used for minor repairs around the house. He selected a flat steel bar and slid its edge beneath the latch. Vanessa immediately stepped toward him. "Richard, stop. You are going to damage the floor." He looked up. "That is what concerns you?" "I am trying to stop you from damaging the house because of an accusation made by a panicked employee." Annie lowered her eyes slightly, but Richard noticed. "Do not speak about her as though she is not standing here." Vanessa looked at him in disbelief. "Now you are taking her side?" "I am not taking anyone's side." Richard tightened his grip on the steel bar. "I am opening this hatch." He forced the bar downward. The latch released with a sharp metallic crack. Richard lifted the iron lid. Beneath the oak floor was a shallow, concrete-lined compartment. A gray steel box sat in the center. Dust covered its surface, but the handle was noticeably cleaner, as though someone had used it recently. Annie immediately recognized the metal corner she had seen through the gap beneath the rug. Richard reached down, lifted the box out, and placed it beside the edge of the rug. It was heavier than he had expected. A small key was still inserted in the lock. Vanessa tightened her grip on the coat. Richard turned the key. The lid opened. The first document bore the seal of Whitmore Industries. Beneath it were property deeds, stock certificates, loan agreements, and copies of identification documents, all organized into clearly labeled folders. Richard removed the first page. The document authorized the transfer of 38% of his voting shares to Langford Capital. The name Richard Whitmore appeared at the bottom beside the signature of a notary in South Carolina. He read it a second time. "I never signed this." Vanessa released a quiet breath. "Then someone forged your signature." Richard did not respond. He removed another file. This document used the Myers Park estate and 3 company-owned properties as collateral for a private loan worth $90 million. The third document granted temporary voting authority to Nathan Cole. Richard stopped. Why is Nathan's name here? Vanessa remained on the other side of the room. I do not know. You worked with him before we met. So did hundreds of other people. He attended 2 charity dinners in this house. That does not mean I know why his name appears on a fraudulent document. Annie reached into the pocket of her apron. The piece of paper I found may belong to one of those pages. Richard held out his hand. Annie gave him the torn fragment. Richard placed it beside the transfer agreement. The ripped edges matched almost perfectly. Vanessa immediately shook her head. She could have taken it from the box. I never opened the box, Annie said. You expect us to believe you? Annie looked toward Richard. Mr. Whitmore can examine the dust around the lock. The paper I found was caught outside the lid. If I had opened the box, the marks around it would not still be undisturbed. Vanessa turned sharply toward her. You seem to know quite a lot about evidence for someone hired to clean floors. Heat rose to Annie's face, but her voice remained steady. I do not know much about evidence. I only remember exactly where I found the paper. Richard continued fitting the 2 pieces together. Annie's fragment was the missing section of a schedule listing several classes of company stock. His forged signature extended across both pieces. He placed the documents on the desk and held out his hand toward Annie. Your phone. She took it out and gave it to him. Vanessa stepped forward. Richard, you cannot seriously intend to use a recording made without my consent. I intend to hear what was said about my company inside my own house. Richard pressed play. Vanessa's voice came through the speaker. Everything has been signed. That fool still does not suspect a thing. After a brief pause, her voice continued. The originals are still hidden in the same place. Once they are moved, he will not be able to stop us. Richard played the recording a second time. He did not take his eyes off Vanessa while it played. When the recording ended, she spoke. It is incomplete. It is clear enough. You do not know who I was talking about. You referred to signed transfer documents hidden in the same place. We are now standing beside forged transfer papers hidden beneath a rug you forbade every member of the staff from touching. I was talking about assets belonging to the foundation. Which foundation? Vanessa hesitated for a moment. The Whitmore Community Foundation. Richard lifted the share transfer agreement. The foundation does not own these shares. I was not talking about these documents. Then which originals were supposed to be collected tonight? Vanessa did not answer directly. Her voice turned sharp. I will not stand here and be interrogated in front of a housemaid. Richard's expression changed. She is here because she found what you tried to hide from me. If Annie's courage touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. You still have not proven that I hid it. Then explain why you forbade the staff from cleaning beneath this rug. It is very expensive. More expensive than every other rug in this house? I did not want anyone touching it. Why? Because it belonged to my grandmother. Richard bent down and turned over one corner of the rug. The manufacturer's label was still attached to the fabric. He read the printed line. No, it did not. He looked up. You bought it in Atlanta 18 months ago. Vanessa said nothing. Richard returned the phone to Annie. Did you hear the voice of the person on the other end of the call? No, sir. Did Vanessa mention the person's name? No. She only said the person should enter through the service gate after 10. Richard looked at the clock on his desk. 8:27. He immediately picked up the phone and called David Mercer, the head of estate security. Come to the study now. Bring 2 people you trust. I also want someone watching the service gate from a position that cannot be seen from the road. Vanessa turned toward the door. I am calling my attorney. You may call when David arrives. You have no right to keep me here. I am preserving evidence until the police determine who forged these documents and who intended to remove them. This is still my home. Richard lifted the transfer agreement. And those are still forged signatures bearing my name. Vanessa reached for the doorknob. Annie immediately stepped aside and made no attempt to block her. But before Vanessa could open the door, Richard spoke. If you leave this room, I will make it clear to everyone in this house that you attempted to walk away immediately after a box containing fraudulent transactions benefiting your former financial advisor was discovered. Vanessa's hand remained on the doorknob. Several seconds passed. At last, she let go. Richard separated the documents into individual stacks but removed nothing else from the box. He handled each page only by the edges, avoiding the signatures and seals. Annie, do not touch these documents again from this point forward. Yes, sir. A firm knock sounded at the door. David Mercer entered with 2 security officers. He was 56, broad-shouldered, and his eyes moved quickly over every detail before he asked a question. He saw the open iron hatch, the steel box on the floor, and Vanessa standing apart from the others. What happened? Richard pointed toward Annie. She found the hatch. My wife insisted there was nothing beneath it. Inside the box are forged documents designed to transfer my shares and use my properties as collateral for loans I never approved. David stepped closer but did not touch the box. Has anyone left the estate since both gates were locked? No, Richard replied. One of the security officers touched his earpiece. Sir, there is a vehicle parked near the service gate. Its lights are off, but the engine is running. The remaining color drained from Vanessa's face. David turned toward her. Were you expecting someone tonight, Mrs. Whitmore? Vanessa did not answer. Outside the window, a pair of headlights appeared beyond the trees. David raised one hand, and the 2 officers moved without waiting for further instructions. One went toward the rear corridor, while the other spoke quietly into his radio. The headlights beyond the trees stopped several yards from the service gate. Keep the gate closed, David said. Do not approach the vehicle unless it attempts to enter. Richard remained beside the desk. Can you identify it? Not yet. The license plate is partly covered by the hedge. Vanessa folded the coat over her arm. People stop outside these gates all the time. Delivery drivers miss the entrance. Guests use the wrong driveway. You are turning a coincidence into evidence. David looked at her. Did you invite anyone to use the service gate tonight? No. Did you tell anyone it would be open after 10? No. Annie still held her phone. She wanted to explain that she had heard Vanessa mention the entrance, but David had already heard enough to understand the connection. Richard pointed toward the chairs near the fireplace. Sit down, Vanessa. I would rather stand. That was not a suggestion. Vanessa studied him before taking the chair farthest from Annie. She placed the coat across her knees and kept both hands on top of it. David approached the desk but stopped before touching the documents. Who opened the box? I did, Richard said. Anyone else handle the contents? Annie gave me the torn page she found. I matched it to one of the transfer schedules. Other than that, only I touched them. David turned to Annie. Did you enter the compartment at any point? No, sir. I only saw the metal seam in the corner of the box. Did you move anything besides the paper caught in the lid? No. He nodded. Good. From this point on, no one touches the box or the hatch. I'll photograph everything before we move it. Vanessa gave a quiet laugh. You are speaking as if a crime has already been established. Richard picked up the document granting voting authority to Nathan Cole. My signature is forged. My property is listed as collateral for a loan I never requested. How much more would you like established before we take precautions? I told you I had nothing to do with those papers. Then help me understand why Nathan Cole benefits from them. I cannot explain another man's name appearing on a document I have never seen. You spoke to someone tonight about signed transfer papers. I was not speaking about these. Then tell us what you were speaking about. Vanessa's eyes moved briefly toward Annie. Not in front of her. Richard's voice lowered. She is the reason those documents are still in this room. She is an employee. So is David. So are half the people who built my company. Employment does not make a person incapable of telling the truth. Vanessa's mouth tightened. You are humiliating me to defend a girl who admits she listened to a private call. Annie spoke before she could stop herself. I did not follow you. I was carrying the tea through the hallway. Vanessa turned toward her. You stood out of sight and recorded me. Because of the paper beneath the rug. You decided what my words meant before you knew anything. I knew you said the originals were hidden in the same place. Enough, Richard said. A voice came through David's radio. The officer at the rear entrance had moved to a window overlooking the service road. Vehicle is a black Chevrolet Suburban, one occupant visible. Driver is using a phone. No attempt to approach the gate. David asked, Plate? The officer read out the number. David repeated it to the second officer. Run it through the private database. Check estate visitor logs and current vendor registrations. Vanessa shifted in her chair. Richard noticed. Do you recognize the vehicle? No. You answered before he finished speaking. Because I do not keep track of every black SUV in Charlotte. David watched her for a moment, then turned back to the radio. Do not let the driver know we are watching. Richard picked up his phone and called Margaret Ellis, the company's general counsel. She answered after the second ring. "Margaret, I need you at the estate. I'm still at the office. What happened? I found forged transfers involving 38% of my voting shares. There are also false liens on the estate and 3 company properties." Her tone changed immediately. "Do not move or destroy anything. Who is named as the recipient?" "Langford Capital. Nathan Cole has temporary voting authority." There was a short silence. "Where did you find the documents?" "In a steel box beneath the floor of my study." "Beneath the floor?" "Under the red rug." Margaret did not ask for an explanation. "I'm leaving now. I'll bring outside counsel and a forensic accountant. Send me photographs only after David documents the room. Do not email them through the household network." Richard ended the call and looked toward Vanessa. She rose. "Sit down," David said. "I need water. One of the officers can bring it. I do not require permission to walk through my own house." Richard moved between her and the door. "You can have water. You are not leaving this room until we know who is waiting outside the gate." Vanessa faced him. "You have no legal right to detain me. You are free to call your attorney." "Then give me my phone." David held out his hand. "You can use the landline. Your personal phone may contain information connected to the documents." "You are not taking my phone. I am not seizing it as law enforcement. I am asking you to preserve it until the police arrive. If you refuse, that refusal will be documented." Vanessa looked at Richard. "Are you going to allow this?" Richard's answer came without hesitation. "Yes." For the first time since the hatch opened, Vanessa appeared uncertain about which argument would still work. Annie stood near the door, aware that she was the least powerful person in the room and the one Vanessa most wanted removed. Mrs. Brooks would be waiting downstairs, unaware that the evening schedule had collapsed. Annie thought about sending her a message, but David had asked everyone to avoid unnecessary calls. The radio sounded again. "Vehicle registered to Cole Strategic Advisory," the officer reported. "Company address matches an office previously leased by Nathan Cole." Richard's attention moved to Vanessa. She closed her eyes for one brief second. David asked, "Is Nathan Cole driving?" "Unable to confirm from this distance." "Has the vehicle moved?" "No. Driver is still on the phone." Vanessa opened her eyes. "Nathan advises several organizations. He may be here to meet someone else." "At my private service gate?" Richard asked. "I do not know why he is there." "Call him." Vanessa did not respond. Richard pointed toward the telephone. "If this is an innocent visit, call him and ask why he is waiting outside. He will know something is wrong if I call from the study line. That sounds like a problem only if he expected a different kind of call." Vanessa's composure thinned. "You have already decided. I am guilty." "No, I have decided not to ignore what is in front of me." David instructed the officer outside to continue observing the Suburban. Then he began photographing the hatch, the box, and each visible document without removing them from their original order. Annie watched him work. The room that had seemed ordinary only an hour earlier now felt unfamiliar, as though every piece of furniture might conceal another fact Richard had never been meant to discover. David photographed the torn transfer sheet beside the matching page. He then examined the box lid. "There are partial fingerprints in the dust," he said. "More than one set." Vanessa looked away. Richard noticed a small envelope beneath the stock transfer agreements. Unlike the other papers, it carried no company seal. A handwritten date appeared on the front. "Tomorrow's date, David," Richard said, pointing to it. "Photograph that before you open anything else." David took several images, then used gloves to lift the envelope. It was unsealed. Inside was a typed letter addressed to the board of Whitmore Industries. Richard read the first lines from where he stood. The letter claimed that he had voluntarily surrendered temporary control of the company because of declining judgment and an inability to manage his financial affairs. At the bottom was another forged signature. Richard turned toward Vanessa. "You are not only taking my shares." Vanessa said nothing. "You were preparing to tell my board that I was no longer capable of running the company." The radio sounded once more. "The Suburban is moving," the officer reported. "It has turned away from the service gate." David reached for his coat. "One unit will follow at a distance." Vanessa stood again, but this time no one told her to sit. Richard held the false letter in his hand while the truth settled into place. The hidden box was not part of a single fraudulent transfer. It was the foundation of a plan designed to remove him from his company, take his property, and leave him unable to challenge any of it until the damage was complete. He looked at Annie. "If you had waited until morning, this box would have been gone." Annie nodded. That is what I was afraid of. Richard turned back to Vanessa. Now I want the answer you refused to give me. How long have you and Nathan been planning this? Vanessa did not answer Richard's question. She remained beside the fireplace, one hand resting on the back of the chair as David's officers moved through the hall outside. Richard placed the false letter on the desk. How long? I told you I had nothing to do with those documents. And I told you to stop repeating an answer the evidence has already contradicted. Vanessa lifted her chin. You have a box no one knew existed, papers anyone could have placed inside it, and a recording that begins in the middle of a conversation. That is not proof that I plan to steal your company. Richard pointed to the telephone. Call Nathan. No. The refusal came too quickly. David stopped photographing the documents and turned toward her. Why not? Because I want an attorney before this goes any further. That is your right, Richard said. Use the landline. Vanessa looked at Annie. Not while she is here. Annie moved toward the door. She had no desire to remain in the room while Vanessa spoke with a lawyer. Richard stopped her. You are not leaving yet. I can wait outside, sir. No. Vanessa has already suggested you planted evidence. Until David records your full account. I want you where everyone can see you. Vanessa shook her head. You are treating her like the victim. She warned me before the papers were removed. She entered a room where she did not belong. She entered with my tea. She touched private property. She picked up a piece of paper trapped beneath a rug. You only have her word for that. A knock came from the door. Mrs. Brooks entered after David gave permission. Her gray uniform was still covered by the white apron she wore during dinner service. She took in the open hatch, the steel box, and Annie standing near Richard's desk. What happened? Vanessa answered first. Your assistant entered the study, searched beneath the rug, removed documents, recorded a private conversation, and accused me of fraud. Mrs. Brooks looked at Annie. Is that what happened? No, Mom. Tell me. Annie explained the marble, the uneven rug, the metal seam, and the paper caught in the hatch. She described the call in the west hallway and repeated the part she had recorded. Mrs. Brooks listened without interrupting. When Annie finished, Mrs. Brooks faced Vanessa. You instructed the staff not to move that rug, because it is valuable. You also changed the study cleaning schedule 3 times this month. I manage this house. I am allowed to change schedules. Yes, ma'am, but each time you asked for the room to remain empty between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. Vanessa's expression hardened. Are you accusing me too? I am answering what I know. Richard turned to Mrs. Brooks. Did anyone besides Vanessa restrict access to the rug? No, sir. Before Mrs. Whitmore bought it, we cleaned the entire study floor every week. After the rug arrived, she said no one was to lift it, not even for inspection. Vanessa released the chair and crossed her arms. This is becoming ridiculous. A housekeeper and a teenage employee are now being treated as financial investigators. Mrs. Brooks's voice remained even. No one said we were investigators. We are telling Mr. Whitmore what happened in his home. Richard looked at Vanessa. You keep speaking about their positions as if that changes the facts. It changes whether they understand what they saw. Annie understood enough to stop a man connected to Nathan from collecting the box. You do not know that the driver came for the box. David's radio sounded. The officer following the Suburban reported that the vehicle had entered a parking garage near South Park and stopped beside another car. The driver had transferred a briefcase before both vehicles left in separate directions. Can you identify either driver? David asked. Not yet. Garage cameras may have the plates. David instructed the officer not to continue without law enforcement support. He then called a former colleague in the Financial Crimes Division and requested immediate assistance. Vanessa turned toward Richard. You are involving the police before speaking to me privately. You had more than enough time to speak privately. You used it to arrange for someone to come through my service gate. You do not know who I called. Then tell me. I will tell my attorney. Richard nodded toward the telephone. Call. Vanessa crossed to the desk but stopped before picking up the receiver. I want my personal phone, David answered. You can read the attorney's number from it while I hold the device. You will not delete or send anything. You have no authority to make that demand. I am asking you to preserve potential evidence voluntarily. If you refuse, I will note the time, the request, and your response before the police arrive. Vanessa looked to Richard for support. He said nothing. David held out her phone. She read the number from the contact list then used the landline. Her attorney agreed to come to the estate and instructed her not to answer further questions. When the call ended, Vanessa moved toward the chair again. This conversation is over. Richard gathered the forged documents into the order in which David had photographed them. The questions may be over for now. The consequences are not. Vanessa sat. You have already decided what you want to believe. I believed you when you said the rug was empty. I did not know about the hatch. You bought the rug. That does not mean I installed something beneath it. You hired the company that refinished this floor 18 months ago. Vanessa's face changed. Richard noticed immediately. What was the company's name? I do not remember. You reviewed every invoice for the renovation. I reviewed dozens of invoices. Mrs. Brooks spoke from beside Annie. The crew wore gray shirts with a red triangle on the back. They came after the regular flooring contractor had finished. David opened a tablet and searched the estate vendor records. Red triangle restoration, he said. 3-day job. Payment approved through the Whitmore Community Foundation. Richard looked at Vanessa. Why did a charity foundation pay for work in my private study? It may have been coded incorrectly. Who submitted the invoice? David scrolled through the record. Authorization came from Vanessa's foundation account. The vendor's mailing address is a private mailbox. Owner? Richard asked. I'll have to trace it. Vanessa's attorney arrived 25 minutes later, followed by Margaret Ellis and an outside forensic accountant. Margaret entered the study carrying a leather case and wearing the same navy suit she had worn at the office. She greeted Mrs. Brooks and Annie before approaching the desk. Has anything been removed from the room? Only the papers Richard handled before David arrived, David said. Everything has been photographed. Margaret put on gloves and examined the first transfer agreement. This is not an amateur forgery. Richard pointed to the percentage. Could it take control from me? If the documents were accepted and combined with the shares already available to outside investors, yes. At minimum, they could force an emergency board vote and freeze your authority while the signatures were challenged. How long would that take to undo? Months, possibly longer. Richard looked toward Vanessa. She sat beside her attorney, who quietly warned her not to respond. Margaret examined the false letter concerning Richard's judgment. This is designed to make the transfer look voluntary. It also creates a reason for the board to disregard any objection you make afterward. So even if I discovered it, they plan to say I was confused. That appears to be the strategy. Annie listened from near the door. The scheme no longer sounded like someone stealing money from an account. It was an attempt to take Richard's name, authority, home, and credibility. At the same time, Margaret noticed her. You are Annie Carter? Yes, ma'am. You found the paper? Yes. And you recorded the call? Only the end. Margaret held out her hand. May I hear it? Annie gave her the phone. After listening twice, Margaret handed it back. You did the right thing by preserving this. Vanessa's attorney stood. My client disputes the interpretation of that recording and denies any knowledge of the documents. From this point forward, all questions should come through me. Margaret faced him. That will be respected. The estate will also preserve every device, access record, vendor file, and security recording connected to this matter. You cannot restrict Mrs. Whitmore from leaving her own residence. No one is preventing her from leaving, Margaret said, but if she chooses to go before law enforcement arrives, that decision will be documented. Vanessa rose slowly. For a moment, Annie thought she would walk out. Instead, Vanessa looked at Richard. After everything I have done for this family, you are letting strangers decide who I am. Richard's answer was quiet. No, Vanessa. The documents are showing me what you did. What they say about who you are will depend on what we find next. A vehicle stopped outside the front entrance. David checked the security monitor. 2 detectives stepped onto the porch, followed by a federal financial crimes agent. Richard looked at the open steel box, then at Annie. The truth had begun with a marble and a crooked edge of fabric. Now it had reached the front door carrying badges, evidence bags, and questions Vanessa could no longer dismiss. The 2 Charlotte Mecklenburg detectives entered first, followed by a federal financial crimes agent carrying a hard case and a narrow evidence kit. David met them at the study door and gave a brief account before allowing anyone inside. Detective Laura Bennett introduced herself, then pointed to the open hatch. No one touches anything until our technician documents the room. Richard nodded. David has already taken photographs. We'll preserve his copies, but our team will create a separate record. The federal agent, Thomas Grant, examined the steel box from several feet away. He was in his early 50s, with reading glasses folded into the front pocket of his jacket. "Are those stock transfer agreements?" Margaret answered. "Transfers, liens, false board resolutions, copied identification records, counterfeit seals, and a letter claiming Mr. Whitmore voluntarily surrendered control because of declining judgment." Grant looked toward Richard. "Did you sign any of them?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone to sign on your behalf?" "No." "Did you authorize Langford Capital or Nathan Cole to exercise voting control?" "No." Grant opened his case. "Then we will treat this as potential securities fraud, identity fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. That may expand after we review the documents." Vanessa's attorney stepped forward. "My client denies any connection to the box or its contents." Grant acknowledged him with a short nod. "Then your client's position will be included in the report." Vanessa sat near the fireplace, her coat still folded over her knees. She no longer tried to explain the documents. Her attorney kept one hand near her chair and quietly reminded her not to answer questions. A crime scene technician photographed the rug before moving it farther from the hatch. He measured the opening, collected prints from the iron lid, and placed markers beside the fresh scratches around the lock. Each document was photographed inside the box before being transferred into a numbered evidence sleeve. Richard remained beside Margaret, following every movement. Agent Grant lifted the false voting agreement by its edges. "This notary commission number can be checked tonight. If it is stolen or fabricated, we will know quickly." Margaret pointed toward the signature. "The forgery appears to be assembled from genuine samples. Where would someone obtain enough samples? Corporate archives, property records, foundation filings, household checks, or any contract Mr. Whitmore signed over the years." Richard looked toward Vanessa. She kept her attention on the floor. Detective Bennett approached Annie. "I need a complete statement from you. We can do it in another room." Annie glanced at Mrs. Brooks. "May she come with me?" "Yes," Bennett said. "She can remain in the room as long as she does not answer for you." Richard started toward them. "Annie, you do not have to." Bennett stopped him gently. "Mr. Whitmore, it is better if we speak to her without anyone involved in the case present." Richard understood. "Of course." Mrs. Brooks guided Annie toward the breakfast room. The formal dinner had been abandoned. Half-folded napkins still rested beside unused plates, and a pot of coffee had gone cold on the sideboard. Detective Bennett placed a recorder on the table. "This is not an interrogation," she said. "You are a witness. I need you to tell me only what you saw and heard. If you are unsure about something, say you are unsure." "Yes, ma'am." "Start with why you entered the study this afternoon." Annie explained that she had been assigned to clean the exposed oak floor. She described the marble rolling beneath the side table, the uneven rug, and the metal seam revealed by the fold. "You moved the rug?" "Only enough to flatten the edge. That was when I saw the metal." "Did you know a compartment was under it?" "No." "Did anyone tell you to search the room?" "No." "Did you open the hatch?" "No. I saw the corner of the box through a narrow gap." "What made you remove the paper?" "It was caught between the lid and the frame. Part of it was already outside." "Did you understand what the paper meant?" "Not completely. I recognized Mr. Whitmore's company name, the share percentages, and his signature. The signature looked wrong." Bennett raised an eyebrow. "How did you know what his signature normally looked like?" "I have seen him sign delivery forms and household receipts." "Did you take the paper because you believed it might be valuable?" "No." "Did you plan to ask for money?" "No." Mrs. Brooks shifted slightly beside her but remained silent. Bennett continued. "Why did you not report it immediately?" Annie folded her hands on the table. "I was not sure what I had found. Mrs. Whitmore had ordered the staff not to move the rug. I knew that if I accused someone without proof, I might not be allowed to explain." "Because you were afraid of losing your job?" "Yes." "Anything else?" Annie hesitated. "I knew people might assume I had gone through private property because I wanted something." Detective Bennett let the answer stand. "Tell me about the phone call." Annie described carrying the tea through the west hallway and hearing Vanessa speak from the recessed corner near the windows. She repeated each sentence she remembered, then explained when she activated the recording. "Did Mrs. Whitmore see you?" "I do not think so." "You are not certain?" "No. She turned when the clock chimed." But I had already moved behind the corner. Did you alter the recording? No. Send it to no one? No. Did you play it for anyone before Mr. Whitmore? No. Bennett took Annie's phone, placed it in airplane mode, and copied the file onto an evidence device without deleting the original. Mrs. Brooks spoke only after the formal questions ended. May I clarify one point? Bennett nodded. No member of the household staff was permitted to lift that rug. Mrs. Whitmore repeated the instruction several times. Annie would not have known what was beneath it unless the edge had already been disturbed. That will be included in your own statement, Bennett said. When Annie left the breakfast room, the estate felt different. Officers moved between the study, the service entrance, and the security office. The evening meal remained untouched. The quiet routine of the house had been replaced by radios, evidence bags, and closed doors. Richard stood in the main hallway with Margaret. When he saw Annie, he approached but stopped at a respectful distance. Are you all right? Yes, sir. Did they treat you properly? They asked what happened. Mrs. Brooks answered more firmly. She handled herself well. Richard looked at Annie's apron, then at the polished floor she had been cleaning only hours earlier. I should have listened before making you defend yourself in front of Vanessa. You did listen. Not immediately. Annie did not answer. There was no useful way to comfort a man who had just discovered that his marriage and company had been used against him. David came from the security room holding a printed visitor log. We found Nathan Cole's access pattern. He entered through the service gate 4 times in the last 6 months. Each visit used a temporary contractor badge. Richard took the page. I was out of town on all 4 dates. Yes. Who approved the badges? David pointed to the final column. Vanessa's household authorization code. Margaret read the entries. The visits align with the dates several forged documents entered external systems. Agent Grant joined them. We also checked the notary number. It belongs to a woman in Greenville who reported her seal stolen 8 months ago. Richard's grip tightened on the visitor log. Can the transfers still be stopped? Margaret answered. We have emergency holds in place, but I need access to the corporate systems tonight. Some documents are already pending review. I'm coming with you. No, you remain here and cooperate with investigators. If someone prepared a claim that your judgment is impaired, we do not give them evidence that you abandoned a crime scene to interfere with company records. Richard disliked the instruction, but he knew she was right. The front door opened. 2 officers escorted Vanessa toward a waiting vehicle, while her attorney followed. She had not been formally arrested, but investigators required a separate interview away from the estate. As she passed Annie, Vanessa stopped. You have no idea what you started. David moved between them. Keep walking, Mrs. Whitmore. Vanessa turned toward Richard instead. When this falls apart, remember that you chose strangers over your wife. Richard's face remained controlled. No. I chose evidence over an explanation that changed every time someone asked a question. Vanessa left without another word. Annie watched the vehicle move beyond the gates. Only then did she realize how tightly she had been holding her hands. Mrs. Brooks touched her arm. You have done enough for one night. Richard looked toward the study, where the red rug remained folded beside the open floor. No, he said quietly. She did what the rest of us failed to do. She noticed. A technician carried the sealed steel box through the hallway. Beneath the lid were documents designed to remove Richard from his company before he understood he was under attack. Margaret gathered her files and headed for the door. If the final transfer request is already in the system, we may have only a few hours. Richard followed her to the entrance. Call me the moment you know. I will. As her car left for uptown Charlotte, Agent Grant returned from the study with another evidence sleeve. Inside was a handwritten list of account numbers, payment dates, and employee initials. One set of initials appeared beside 5 separate transfers from Langford Capital. Margaret had been right. The conspiracy did not end with Vanessa and Nathan. Someone inside Whitmore Industries had been helping them. Agent Grant placed the evidence sleeve on the console table without opening it. The initials appear beside 5 payments from Langford Capital, he said. We will need payroll records and a current employee directory before we can identify anyone. Richard read the letters through the plastic. M.H. Margaret had already left for Whitmore Industries, but Richard called her before she reached the end of the estate drive. She answered through the car speaker. We found a payment list, he said. 5 transfers marked with the initials M.H. Margaret was silent for a moment. There are at least 6 employees with those initials. Anyone with access to archive signatures? Possibly. I will have human resources prepare a restricted list, but no one contacts the employees yet. We cannot warn the person involved. Call me when you reach the office. I will. Richard ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket. Agent Grant studied the initials. Do not assume they identify an employee. They could refer to a department, an account, or a person outside the company. Richard nodded, though patience was becoming harder to maintain. Every document revealed another part of a plan that had been operating around him while he signed reports, attended meetings, and returned home believing his company was secure. Detective Bennett approached from the breakfast room. We have Annie's statement and a verified copy of the recording. Mrs. Brooks will give her statement next. Is Annie free to leave? Richard asked. Yes, we may need to speak with her again, but she has cooperated fully. Richard found Annie near the staff entrance, removing her apron and folding it over one arm. Her mother had been called and was driving to the estate. You should go home, he said. Annie looked toward the study. Do you need me to finish anything first? No. The dining room is still set. It can wait. She nodded, but did not move. Richard noticed that her hands were no longer trembling. Fatigue had replaced the fear that had carried her into his study. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? For demanding that you justify yourself before I checked the floor. You did check, only after reminding you that Vanessa was my wife. Annie lowered her eyes briefly. Anyone would have wanted to protect their family. That does not excuse dismissing the person who brought the warning. I did not expect you to believe me immediately. Why not? She considered the question. Because I work here. Richard waited. And because I am 18, she added. People hear those two things before they hear the rest. Richard did not offer an easy denial. He remembered how quickly he had measured her accusation against Vanessa's place in his life, instead of measuring it against the details Annie provided. You should not have needed to shout to be heard. No, sir. The answer carried no anger, which made it harder for him to avoid. A compact sedan stopped at the front entrance. Denise Carter stepped out before David's officer could reach the door. She wore navy scrubs beneath a brown coat and had driven directly from an evening shift at an assisted living facility. Annie crossed the foyer. Mom. Denise took her daughter by the shoulders. Are you all right? I'm fine. I received a call saying the police were here and you were giving a statement. I found something in the study. Denise looked past her toward Richard, then at the officers moving through the hall. What kind of something? Richard approached, but left enough distance for Denise to remain beside Annie. Mrs. Carter, I'm Richard Whitmore. I know who you are. Her tone was respectful but guarded. Annie discovered forged financial documents hidden beneath my study floor. She warned me before someone could remove them. Denise looked at Annie. You went under his floor? No. A paper was caught in the lid. I saw it when the rug shifted. She did not search my office, Richard said. The discovery was accidental. Denise's attention returned to him. Is anyone accusing her of stealing? No. Did anyone search her things? No. Will her name be given to the press? Not by me. Agent Grant joined them. Mrs. Carter, your daughter is a witness, not a suspect. Her statement is consistent with the physical evidence. Denise released a breath but kept one hand on Annie's arm. We are going home. Yes, ma'am, Annie said. Richard stepped aside. She will be paid for the full shift. Denise's expression tightened. She is not asking to be paid for talking to the police. I understand. I meant she should not lose wages, because the household stopped operating. Annie picked up her backpack from the staff room. As she passed Mrs. Brooks, the older woman adjusted the strap that had twisted against Annie's shoulder. You call me when you get home, Mrs. Brooks said. I will, and do not answer unfamiliar numbers tonight. Annie nodded. Richard watched mother and daughter leave together. Denise opened the passenger door for Annie, waited until she was seated, then walked around the car. The sedan moved down the drive and passed through the gate. Agent Grant returned to the evidence table. We will need access to your corporate systems, financial accounts, and estate security records. Warrants may be required for devices controlled by Mrs. Whitmore or Mr. Cole. You will have everything my counsel permits. That is the right answer. Richard looked toward the staircase. Vanessa's absence had changed the house more than he expected. Her flowers remained on the hall table. Her reading glasses rested beside a magazine in the sitting room. A scarf hung over the back of a chair. Each ordinary object now seemed connected to questions he had not asked. David came from the security office carrying a tablet. We recovered 6 months of service gate entries. Nathan's vehicle appears on 4 dates, but there is something else. The main study camera lost power during each visit. Only that camera? Yes. The rest of the system remained active. Who can disable one camera without triggering an alarm? Someone with administrative access or someone physically disconnecting the line. Richard looked toward the open study door. The wiring panel is inside the west service closet. David nodded. Vanessa has a household access code, but so do 3 senior employees. Mrs. Brooks? She has one. Richard's expression changed. David understood. I am not accusing her. I am identifying access. Agent Grant added, do not clear or condemn anyone based on opportunity. We follow records. A message arrived from Margaret. She had reached Whitmore Industries and found the legal department already working under emergency restrictions. Richard called her immediately. I have the initials list, she said. 6 current employees and 2 former employees match MH. Only one has regular access to archived executive documents. Who? Martin Hale, Deputy Director of Corporate Records. Richard knew the name. Martin had worked for Whitmore Industries for 11 years. He attended quarterly meetings, managed document retention, and had access to thousands of contracts bearing Richard's signature. Is he in the building? His office is empty. What time did he leave? Security records show he exited at 6:12. Call him. No. His company laptop is still connected remotely from an outside location. If we contact him, he may destroy records. Richard turned toward Agent Grant. Martin Hale may be our internal contact. Grant took out his phone. Send his full name, address, and employment information to Detective Bennett. We will request preservation orders for his accounts. Margaret continued. There is another problem. A final transfer package was uploaded at 5:48 this afternoon. It is scheduled for automated review at 9 tomorrow morning. Can you stop it? We can challenge it. But the system recognizes your forged authorization and the counterfeit board resolution. I need the independent directors to issue an emergency suspension before midnight. Call them. I already have. 2 are traveling. 1 is in surgery with her husband, and another is not answering. How many do you need? 3 confirmed votes. Richard checked the time. It was 10:34. How many do you have? Tfo. The house no longer mattered. The box had been found, Vanessa had been removed, and Nathan's vehicle had been identified. Yet the plan beneath the rug was still moving through systems that did not know the signatures were false. Richard tightened his hold on the phone. Tell me who has not answered. Charles Bain. I'll call him. Richard. He may be involved. His initials are not MH, but he supported Nathan's consulting proposal last year. Then I will not discuss the investigation. I will ask him to join an emergency board call. Be careful. Richard ended the call and selected Charles's number. It rang 5 times before a man answered with traffic noise behind him. Richard, it's late. I need you on an emergency board call within 10 minutes. What kind of emergency? One involving company control. The traffic noise disappeared as though Charles had closed a car door. I'm not near my computer. Use your phone. I need more information. You will receive it on the call. Charles hesitated. Who else is joining? Richard heard the question for what it was. Charles did not ask whether the company was safe. He asked who else knew. Everyone whose vote matters, Richard said. 10 minutes. He ended the call before Charles could respond. Agent Grant watched him. You suspect him? I suspect anyone more interested in the room than the emergency. David's tablet sounded with an incoming alert. He opened the estate's archived camera system and enlarged an image from the forgotten hallway camera outside the study. The footage was grainy, but 2 figures were visible. Vanessa stood beside the red rug, while a man carried the steel box toward the open hatch. Richard moved closer. The man turned enough for the camera to capture the side of his face. It was not Nathan Cole. It was Martin Hale. David enlarged the image until Martin Hale's face became clearer. The old hallway camera had recorded him entering the study at 4:36 on a Tuesday afternoon. Vanessa followed several steps behind, carrying the red rug rolled beneath one arm. Richard checked the date displayed in the corner of the screen. I was in Dallas that week. David nodded. Your calendar confirms it. You left Monday morning and returned Thursday night. Agent Grant leaned toward the tablet. How long were they inside? 43 minutes. Can you see them leave? David moved the recording forward. Martin appeared first. no longer carrying the steel box. Vanessa followed after smoothing her hair and checking the hallway in both directions. Grant asked, "Is there footage from inside the study?" The camera failed 2 minutes before they entered and returned 6 minutes after they left. "That is too precise to be accidental." Richard took out his phone. "I'm calling Margaret." Agent Grant stopped him. "Tell her what we found, but do not ask anyone at the company to approach Hale. We need his remote connection preserved." Margaret answered immediately. "The third board member just joined," she said before Richard could speak. "We have enough votes to suspend the transfer package. I am drafting the resolution now." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. "Do it. It will be filed before midnight." "We identified M.H. Martin Hale appears on the estate's archived camera carrying the steel box into my study." Margaret became quiet. "Are you certain?" "David has the footage. Martin has access to every archive signature, property schedule, and board resolution from the past 15 years. Can he still access the system?" "Yes. His remote session remains active, but we moved it into a monitored environment. He believes he is connected to the normal records server." Agent Grant held out his hand for the phone. Richard placed the call on speaker. "Miss Ellis, this is Thomas Grant with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. Do not terminate Hale's session. Have your technical staff create a forensic image and record every command. Can you see what he is accessing?" "Not yet. Our security director is opening a live audit log. Call me directly when you have it. Do not use company email." Margaret agreed and ended the call. Richard looked again at Martin's image. He knew Martin as a quiet records administrator who wore the same dark suits, brought homemade lunches, and rarely spoke during meetings, unless asked a direct question. Nothing about him had ever demanded attention. David closed the video. "Martin's address is in Matthews. Detectives are requesting a warrant, but that will take time." "What if he runs?" Richard asked. "Then we locate him. We do not warn him by moving too soon." Richard walked toward the windows. Police vehicles remained near the front drive, their lights off. The investigators had removed the most important evidence, but the open hatch still divided the study floor. "How much did they pay him?" Richard asked. Grant lifted the evidence sleeve containing the handwritten list. 5 transfers total just under $200,000. We have not confirmed the receiving account. He sold access to my company for that? People rarely describe it to themselves that way. He may say it was consulting work, a loan, or compensation he believed he deserved. He knew what those documents could do. That is what the records must establish. Richard turned back. "You speak as though motive matters. It matters in court. It does not erase the conduct." David's phone rang. He answered, listened, then placed it on the desk. The garage security office identified the man driving Nathan Cole's Suburban. It was Nathan. He transferred a briefcase to a silver sedan registered to Martin Hale. Agent Grant immediately called Detective Bennett. "We have a confirmed exchange between Cole and Hale tonight. Request traffic, camera preservation from South Park to Matthews and Charlotte Douglas." Richard asked, "Charlotte Douglas? If Hale has the originals or access devices, he may try to leave." The front door opened downstairs. Mrs. Brooks appeared at the study entrance a few minutes later after finishing her statement. "Mr. Whitmore, the officers said the kitchen staff may leave. Should I dismiss everyone?" "Yes. Pay them for the evening. I already entered the full hours." "Thank you." She looked toward the exposed hatch. "Do you need anything before I go?" Richard almost said no, then realized he had eaten nothing since lunch. "Coffee, if it isn't too much trouble." "It is no trouble." She returned with a fresh pot, 2 cups, and a plate of turkey sandwiches left from the canceled dinner preparations. She poured coffee for Richard and David, then set a cup near Agent Grant. Grant thanked her. Mrs. Brooks remained by the tray. "May I ask something?" Richard nodded. "Will Annie's name become public?" "We are trying to prevent that. Trying is not the same as protecting her." Richard accepted the correction. "What do you recommend?" "Do not let your communications people turn her into a headline. She did not act for publicity. And make sure no one at the company suggests she was paid to accuse Mrs. Whitmore." "No one will. With respect, sir, you cannot promise what people will say. You can promise what the company will tolerate." Richard put down his coffee. "Then the company will not tolerate retaliation, rumors presented as fact, or any attempt to discredit her because of her job or race." Mrs. Brooks gave a small nod. "That is a better promise." After she left, Agent Grant took one of the sandwiches. She is direct. She has managed this house for 23 years. Then she probably knows more about it than anyone. Richard glanced toward the hatch. Apparently everyone knew more about parts of my house than I did. David's tablet displayed an incoming encrypted call from Margaret. Her face appeared on the screen, lit by the conference room at Whitmore Industries. "We have the live audit log," she said. "Martin is searching the transfer package. Can he change it?" Richard asked. "Not after the board suspension." But he does not know that yet. He has opened the forged resolution 4 times and attempted to download the approval history. Grant asked, "Can you preserve the attempted downloads?" "Yes. Any external Our system shows a removable drive mounted 17 minutes ago." Grant stood. "That gives us immediate risk of evidence destruction. Where is the laptop registered?" "Martin's home office." David checked his messages. "The Matthews police are outside the address. No visible movement. His car is in the driveway." Grant spoke into his phone. "Tell them to hold position until the warrant is signed. Do not knock." Margaret continued. "There is more." Martin searched for Richard's medical records and the phrase executive incapacity clause. Richard looked toward the false letter claiming he could no longer manage the company. "They were preparing to challenge my judgment." Yes, the letter beneath the rug was not only cover for the transfer. They intended to use it during an emergency board meeting. Who would call the meeting? "We found a draft notice under Martin's credentials. It names Charles Baines as acting chair." Richard remembered Charles asking who else would join the emergency call. "Charles gave us the 3rd vote tonight." Margaret's expression remained careful. He may have done that because he realized the plan had failed, or because he was never involved. Both remain possible. Agent Grant said, "Preserve every communication between Baines, Hale, Cole, and Vanessa. Do not confront Baines." A notification sounded on David's phone. "The warrant is approved." Grant took his coat. "Matthews officers will enter with our team. I'm going." Richard stepped toward him. "I'm coming." "No. That man helped prepare documents to remove me from my company. And that is exactly why you remain here. Your presence would create risk and complicate the search." Richard disliked being told to wait inside his own home while others acted, but Margaret's voice came through the tablet. "Listen to him, Richard. We have stopped the transfer. Do not create a new problem because you need to see the next step happen." He remained where he was. Grant left with Detective Bennett and 2 officers. David stayed to secure the estate and coordinate the camera records. For the next 40 minutes, Richard sat at his desk while Margaret completed the emergency suspension. At 11:47, she sent confirmation that the transfer package had been frozen before automated review. "They cannot take control tomorrow morning," she said. Richard should have felt relief. Instead, he looked at the exposed floor and understood how close the plan had come to succeeding. David's radio broke the quiet. "Search team has entered Hale's residence. Subject is in custody. No resistance." Richard stood. The next message came several minutes later. They found the company laptop, a removable drive, counterfeit seals, and a packed suitcase. Margaret asked, "Anything linking him directly to Vanessa or Nathan?" David listened to the officer, then looked at Richard. "There is a second phone on the desk. The most recent message was sent to Vanessa at 8:19 tonight." "What does it say?" David read it aloud. Annie saw the hatch. "Get the box before Richard opens it." Richard looked toward the doorway where Annie had stood with the tea tray, risking her job to make him listen. Martin had known her name. More troubling, he had known about her discovery before she entered the study. Someone inside the estate had warned him. Richard read the message again. Annie saw the hatch. "Get the box before Richard opens it." The timestamp showed 8:19 p.m., several minutes before Annie entered the study with the tea tray. David placed the tablet on the desk. "Martin sent this to Vanessa. The question is how he knew." "Someone in the house told him," Richard said. "Possibly, but we should not assume that yet." Mrs. Brooks had already left. The remaining household staff had been dismissed one at a time after officers recorded their names and contact information. David ordered the security team not to call anyone back until investigators understood how information had left the estate. Richard walked toward the exposed hatch. Annie discovered this in the afternoon. Mrs. Brooks called her away. If another employee saw her near the rug, that person may have warned Martin, or Martin may have been watching remotely. Richard turned. Through the security system? The main study camera was disabled during his visits. which means he understood how the network worked. He may have kept access afterward. David opened the estate's camera administration records. The system listed every authorized user, but several older vendor accounts had not been removed after renovations. One account belonged to Red Triangle Restoration, the company that had worked on the study floor. "It should have expired 18 months ago," David said. "Can you see whether it was used today?" David entered the date and waited for the report to load. A series of remote connections appeared on the screen. The vendor account had accessed the hallway cameras 3 times that afternoon. The final connection began at 4:11 and remained active until 8:22. Richard checked the locations. West hallway, study entrance, service corridor. David nodded. Someone using Martin's old vendor credentials could watch most of Annie's route through the house. Could he see the rug? Not directly. The camera inside the study was offline, but the hall camera would show Annie entering and leaving. If she spent longer than expected near the study and carried a piece of paper out, Martin may have realized what happened. Richard remembered Annie standing at his desk, afraid she would be dismissed before she could explain. While she questioned whether to speak, the people behind the scheme already knew she had found something. "Can you confirm the remote connection came from Martin's house? Not without the provider records, but the technical team can compare it to his laptop." David called Agent Grant and reported the vendor account. Grant instructed him to preserve the logs and send them through the encrypted evidence portal. Richard's phone rang before David ended the call. Margaret was still at Whitmore Industries. "We completed the emergency filing," she said. "The transfer is suspended, and every related account has been flagged." "What about Charles Baines?" "He joined the board call and voted for the suspension. He asked several questions about how the documents were discovered." "What kind of questions?" "Whether the box was found by an employee, whether police had the originals, and whether Nathan had been contacted." Richard walked to the window. "Did you answer?" "Only what was necessary for the vote." "Do you think he is involved?" "I think he knows more than he has said." "That is not the same thing." David heard the exchange. "Ask Margaret whether Charles has access to estate schedules." Richard repeated the question. "Not directly," Margaret answered, "but he receives your travel calendar before quarterly meetings. He knew you were in Dallas when Martin brought the box into the study. Preserve his communications." "Already underway." Margaret paused. "There is something else." The compliance team found an email Martin deleted from his company account 3 days ago. The recovery copy contains an attachment named Succession Timeline. "What is in it?" "A schedule beginning tomorrow morning. At 9, the transfer package enters review. At 10:30, Charles calls an emergency board meeting. By noon, the board receives the letter claiming you voluntarily stepped aside. At 2, Nathan submits temporary authority to 3 banks. Richard looked at the false incapacity letter on the evidence table. "And Vanessa?" Her name appears beside a 6 p.m. departure from the estate. "Departure to where?" "The schedule says private residence. No address." The words carried more weight than the financial steps. Vanessa had not planned to remain beside him once the company was taken. She intended to leave the house after the board accepted the lie that he could no longer manage his own affairs. "Was I supposed to be here while this happened?" Margaret's voice softened. "The schedule says you would be taken to a medical facility for evaluation." Richard said nothing. David moved closer to the phone. "Does it name a doctor?" "A Dr. Samuel Kent." Richard knew the name. Kent had attended 2 charity dinners and once spoke with Vanessa about private elder care facilities, though Richard was only 50 and had no condition requiring evaluation. "Call the licensing board," Richard said. "Find out whether Kent knows his name is being used." "I will." After the call ended, David returned to the archived camera footage. He selected the west hallway feed from the afternoon and advanced to the time Annie cleaned the study. The angle showed only the doorway and part of the corridor. Annie entered with her bucket and cloth. 20 minutes later, she emerged after Mrs. Brooks called her. David slowed the recording. A folded piece of paper was visible in Annie's apron pocket. Less than 1 minute after she left, the remote user enlarged the image and paused it. Richard saw the digital command in the access log. They zoomed in on her. "Yes." The camera remained fixed on Annie as she walked toward the dining room. Then the user switched to the service corridor and watched Mrs. Brooks assign her another task. At 8:14, the same account opened the west hallway feed. Annie appeared carrying the tea tray. Vanessa stood near the windows with her phone. The remote user watched both women. Martin did not need a second person inside the estate. Through the forgotten vendor account, he saw Annie stop, hide near the corner, and remove her phone. 5 minutes later, he sent the warning to Vanessa. Richard pointed to the screen. He watched her record the call. David nodded. That explains the message. It also explained why the rug was perfectly smooth when Annie entered the study. Vanessa had ended her call, received Martin's warning, and returned to the room before Annie arrived. She tried to correct the rug, Richard said, and probably planned to remove the box as soon as you were distracted. A call came through from Agent Grant. Martin's removable drive contains copies of the forged documents, estate camera logs, and a list of planned payments. We also found the access credentials for Red Triangle Restoration. Has he spoken? Only to request an attorney. What about Nathan? Traffic cameras place his Suburban heading toward Charlotte Douglas. Airport police have been notified. Richard looked at the clock. It was after midnight. Does he have a flight? We found a reservation to Miami under his name, departing at 1:10. From there, he has a separate ticket to the Cayman Islands. Grant ended the call to coordinate with airport authorities. Richard remained beside the desk while David printed the remote access logs. The conspiracy had depended on more than forged signatures. It depended on watching workers without being noticed, using service entrances, forgotten passwords, and the assumption that no one would listen if Annie spoke. 20 minutes later, Grant called again. Nathan Cole has been detained at the airport. Did he have the briefcase? Yes. Inside are original notarized pages, 2 counterfeit seals, multiple account devices, and a storage unit key. Richard released the edge of the desk. Then it is over. No, Grant said. The transfer is stopped, and the primary evidence is secure. That is not the same as the case being over. What else? Nathan had a second phone. His last outgoing call was to Charles Baines. Richard's relief disappeared. When? 6 minutes after your emergency board call ended. Richard looked toward the uncovered floor. The people who had hidden the box were being found one by one, but the plan still reached into the boardroom. The next threat would not arrive through the service gate. It was already sitting at Richard's table. Richard remained in the study after the call ended. The boardroom was no longer an abstract threat. Charles Baines had voted to stop the transfer, then contacted Nathan minutes later. Whether he was helping the investigation or protecting himself remained unclear. David closed the archived camera system and gathered the printed access logs. We should assume Charles knows Nathan has been detained, he said. Then he may begin deleting records. Agent Grant has already requested preservation orders for their phone accounts. Margaret is securing the company systems. Richard picked up his phone. I want Charles removed from every committee until we know the truth. Not tonight. Richard looked at David. If you suspend him immediately, he will know what investigators found on Nathan's phone. Let him believe the call has not been discovered. You are asking me to sit across from a man who may have planned to declare me incompetent. I am asking you to give law enforcement time to prove it. Richard placed the phone back on the desk. He had built Whitmore Industries by acting faster than competitors, yet every person in the house now kept telling him that speed could damage the case. At 1:14 inches the morning, Margaret called from the Uptown headquarters. The transfer suspension is fully recorded, she said. The independent directors have signed it. No bank, trustee, or outside administrator can process those shares without a new board review. Good. We also locked Martin's credentials and isolated his files. The technical team found deleted messages between him and Charles. Richard stood straighter. What do they say? Charles asked whether the incapacity letter would be ready before the emergency meeting. Martin answered that Vanessa had the signed version under the rug. David moved closer to the speaker. Margaret continued. There is another exchange from last week. Charles wrote, Once Richard is removed, I want written confirmation of the chairmanship. Richard walked to the edge of the uncovered floor. So Charles was not simply aware of the plan. No, he expected to benefit from it. What did Nathan promise him? Acting chairman of the board and a consulting agreement after 3 divisions were sold. Richard thought of Charles during the emergency call, asking who else had joined before casting the vote that stopped the fraud. He voted for the suspension because he knew they had been discovered. That is the most reasonable interpretation. Can we confront him now? Agent Grant says no. Investigators want to see whether Charles contacts anyone else before morning. Richard checked the time. Where is he? His phone location places him at his home near Lake Norman. Do we know that the phone is with him? No. Margaret's voice softened. Go upstairs, Richard. The company is secure for tonight. My wife planned to have me declared incapable. One board member expected to replace me, and a records director watched my house through stolen camera access. I am not going to sleep. Then eat something and stop standing beside an open hole in the floor. Richard looked down at the hatch. I will call you if anything changes, Margaret said. Do not call Charles. The line ended. David sent one officer to remain near the front entrance and another to monitor the service gate. He then closed the study door but left the evidence markers undisturbed. Mrs. Brooks left sandwiches in the breakfast room. I'm not hungry. You have said that for 6 hours. Richard followed him downstairs. The breakfast room still held the remains of the abandoned evening. Unused plates had been cleared, but the floral centerpiece and folded napkins remained. Richard poured coffee while David warmed 2 sandwiches in the kitchen. A photograph stood on the cabinet beside the window. It showed Richard with Vanessa at a foundation event the previous spring. She had one hand on his arm and wore the same composed smile she used whenever cameras were present. Richard turned the photograph face down. David placed a plate in front of him. You do not need to decide what the entire marriage meant tonight. I am not deciding. I am realizing how little I knew. You knew what she allowed you to see. I accepted what was convenient to see. David sat across from him. That may be true. It still does not make you responsible for her crimes. Richard took one bite of the sandwich and set it down. Annie saw one crooked edge and questioned it. I lived with Vanessa and ignored every inconsistency. Annie had no reason to trust the rug. You had years of reasons to trust your wife. And when Annie spoke, I defended Vanessa before I examined the floor. You examined it. After making Annie prove she deserved to be heard, David did not argue. A call came through at 1:46. Agent Grant had finished the initial search of Martin's house. We recovered payment records connecting Martin, Nathan, and Charles, Grant said. Martin's second phone also contains messages from Vanessa going back 14 months. Has Martin spoken? His attorney arrived. He is not answering questions. What about Nathan? Same position. His attorney is meeting him at the federal office. And Charles? We are monitoring lawful account activity. At 1:31, he sent Vanessa's attorney a message asking whether she had made a statement. Richard's hand tightened around the coffee cup. He is trying to learn whether she named him. That is possible. Do not contact him. Grant ended the call before Richard could object. At the Carter apartment on the west side of Charlotte, Annie sat at the small kitchen table while her mother heated canned tomato soup. Her work apron had been placed in a plastic grocery bag because investigators might ask to examine it later. The acceptance letter remained inside her backpack near the door. Denise set a bowl in front of her. You need to eat. I'm not hungry. That appears to be a problem in wealthy houses and ordinary apartments tonight. Annie managed a small smile and lifted the spoon. Denise sat across from her. Tell me what Mrs. Whitmore said before the police arrived. Annie repeated the accusations, that she had entered a private room, planted evidence, listened to a call, and expected money. Denise's face tightened. Did Mr. Whitmore believe her? At first he defended her. Of course he did. Then he lifted the rug. Denise folded her hands. You did the right thing, but doing the right thing does not guarantee people will treat you fairly afterward. I know. If reporters come, you do not speak without a lawyer. If anyone from that company offers money, you call me. If someone asks you to sign something, you read every word. Mom, no one has offered me anything. Not yet. Annie looked into the soup. I wasn't trying to get anything. I know that. You know that. But some people will find it easier to believe an 18-year-old black housemaid wanted money than to believe a wealthy woman committed fraud. Annie placed the spoon down. Should I have stayed quiet? No. Denise answered without hesitation. You should never have been forced to choose between your job and warning someone. But once you saw what you saw, silence would have protected the wrong person. Annie's phone vibrated on the table. The screen displayed an unknown number. She remembered Mrs. Brooks's warning and did not answer. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Denise reached across the table. Do not play it yet. It could be the police. They will identify themselves and call again. The phone rang a second time from the same number. Annie let it stop. Then a text message arrived. You should have kept cleaning and minded your own business. Annie read it twice. Denise took the phone, photographed the message with her own device, and called Detective Bennett using the number on the card she had been given at the estate. At the Whitmore house, David received the report several minutes later. He brought Richard the screenshot. Richard read the message. Can they trace the number? It is a prepaid line. Detective Bennett is requesting records. Does Annie have security? Not yet. Arrange it. We need her mother's consent. Then ask. David called Denise and offered a security officer outside the apartment until investigators identified the sender. Denise agreed only after confirming the officer would remain in an unmarked vehicle and would not interfere with their neighbors. Richard looked toward the dark windows. The conspiracy had failed to remove the box, but someone was already trying to frighten the person who found it. His phone rang again. This time, the caller was Charles Baines. Richard let it ring once before answering. Charles, I heard Nathan was detained at the airport, Charles said. We need to talk before the investigators begin making assumptions. Richard kept his voice steady. What assumptions are you concerned about? There was a pause. Not over the phone. Meet me at the office before the board arrives. What time? 6:30, just the two of us. Richard looked at David, who was already writing the details down. I'll be there, Richard said. He ended the call. David shook his head. You will not meet him alone. He believes I will. What do you think he wants? Richard looked at the forged incapacity letter sealed inside an evidence bag. To discover how much I know. Outside, the first gray light had not yet reached the trees. In less than 5 hours, Richard would enter the office where Charles expected to inherit his chair. This time, however, the conversation would not take place without witnesses. At 6:15, Richard entered Whitmore Industries through the employee parking garage beneath the Uptown Tower. The building was not yet open to the public, but several lights burned on the executive floors. Cleaning crews moved through the lobby, and the overnight security officer greeted him with the same formality he used every morning. David followed several steps behind. He wore no visible radio and carried only a slim folder. 2 federal agents had entered through a separate service elevator 5 minutes earlier. They would remain in an unused conference room beside Richard's office, where the security team had already activated the recording system. You understand the plan? David asked as the elevator rose. Charles believes he is meeting me alone. You let him speak. Do not accuse him. Do not reveal what was recovered from Nathan or Martin. And if he tries to leave, we let him leave unless the agents decide otherwise. Richard looked toward the changing floor numbers. He helped prepare papers to take my company and have me placed in a medical facility. That is why you cannot give his attorney a reason to claim you threatened him. The elevator opened on the 42nd floor. Margaret waited near the reception desk with a legal pad and 2 cups of coffee. She had removed her jacket, and the sleeves of her white blouse were folded to her elbows. The recording equipment is active, she said. Charles's access card was used in the garage 3 minutes ago. Any news about the message sent to Annie? Not yet. Investigators are comparing the prepaid phone records with devices recovered from Martin and Nathan. Richard accepted the coffee but did not drink it. Where will you be? In the adjoining room with Agent Grant. David will remain near the elevator. Richard entered his office alone. Charlotte was beginning to brighten beyond the windows. Delivery trucks moved along Tryon Street, and the first buses stopped near the square. On an ordinary morning, Richard would have reviewed shipping reports before most employees arrived. Now every folder on his desk reminded him that the company's own records had been used to manufacture a version of his life in which he no longer controlled his name. At 6:28, Charles Baines entered without knocking. He was 62, broad through the shoulders, with silver hair and a dark overcoat folded over one arm. He closed the door behind him and checked the room before approaching Richard's desk. You came alone? Charles asked. Richard remained seated. You asked me to. I mean, no lawyers, no security. Why would I need them? Charles placed his coat on a chair but did not sit. I heard Nathan was stopped at the airport. Who told you? People talk. Which people? Charles ignored the question. This situation is larger than Vanessa hiding papers in your house. If investigators begin pulling every board communication, the company could be damaged even if the transfer never happens. The transfer has been suspended. I know, Richard noted the answer. The suspension had been discussed only on the confidential board call and in restricted legal communications. You voted for it because it was the responsible action. Then why are you here before sunrise? Charles finally sat across from him. To keep you from making this worse. How? By treating everyone connected to Nathan as part of a criminal conspiracy. Richard set his coffee aside. Were you connected to him? I knew him professionally. You called him after the board meeting. Charles paused. Who told you that? You did not answer the question. I called because I wanted to know whether he had submitted anything in my name. Why would he submit something in your name? Charles looked toward the windows. Nathan discussed a possible restructuring with several directors. Nothing illegal. He believed parts of the company would perform better independently. Did he offer you the chairmanship? No. The denial came calmly, but Richard could see Charles measuring each word before releasing it. Did you know about the letter claiming I was no longer capable of running Whitmore Industries? No. Did you know an emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10:30 this morning? Charles's attention returned to him. There are emergency meetings scheduled all the time. This one named you acting chairman. Charles stood. I did not come here to be questioned. Then why did you come? To warn you. About what? Charles moved toward the desk and lowered his voice. Vanessa will protect herself. Nathan will do the same. Martin Hale is a records employee facing federal charges. Any one of them may name people who had no role in the forged documents simply to reduce their own exposure. Are you worried they will name you? I am worried you will believe them. Richard allowed the silence to remain between them. Charles continued. You are angry. You have every reason to be. But anger makes people confuse proximity with guilt. I attended meetings with Nathan. I reviewed restructuring proposals. I may have discussed succession planning because boards are required to prepare for sudden changes. Did your succession planning include having me taken to a medical facility? Charles's face changed. It was only a brief break in his control, but Richard saw it. What are you talking about? You tell me. I've never discussed anything like that. Richard leaned forward. Then why did you ask Martin whether the incapacity letter would be ready before the emergency meeting? Charles looked toward the closed office door. You said we were alone. We are. The answer did not reassure him. Charles took his phone from his pocket. I think this meeting is over. Sit down. No. You wanted to know how much I knew. Now you know. Charles moved toward the door, but before he reached it, Margaret entered from the adjoining conference room with Agent Grant behind her. Grant displayed his credentials. Mr. Baines, we would like to speak with you about communications recovered from Martin Hale's company account and Nathan Cole's phone. Charles stopped. His first reaction was not surprise. It was calculation. I want my attorney. You have that right, Grant said. Before counsel arrives, I am asking you to preserve your phone and not alter or delete any information. Charles slipped the device back into his pocket. I do not consent to a search. No one asked you to consent to one. A preservation order has already been issued. Charles turned toward Richard. You arranged this. I agreed to listen. You brought federal agents into a private board matter. You helped turn a board matter into fraud. Margaret stepped between them. Richard, let Agent Grant handle this. Charles collected his coat. I am leaving. Grant did not block the door. You are free to go. An agent will provide written notice regarding preservation of records. Charles hesitated, perhaps expecting detention. When none came, he walked past David and entered the elevator. Richard waited until the doors closed. You let him leave. We heard enough, Grant said. He denied knowledge of details you had not fully described, reacted to the medical facility reference, and confirmed concern about being named. That does not prove the charges by itself, but it supports the documentary evidence. Margaret handed Grant a printed copy of the overnight recovery report. We also found a calendar invitation Martin created under Charles's credentials. It lists this morning's emergency meeting and includes a draft resolution naming Charles acting chairman. Grant read it. Was the invitation sent? No. It was scheduled for automatic release at 8. Richard looked at the clock. It was 6:46. Margaret continued. We disabled it after preserving the metadata. David entered holding his phone. Detective Bennett traced the threatening message sent to Annie. The prepaid number connected once to the estate's guest wireless network. When? Richard asked. Last night at 8:52, after Vanessa received Martin's warning and before officers removed her from the house. Richard's expression hardened. Vanessa sent it? Not from her personal phone. The device is still unidentified, but the connection came from inside the estate. Margaret asked. Who remained in the house at that time? Vanessa, her attorney, security personnel, investigators, Mrs. Brooks, Annie, Richard, and several staff members waiting to be interviewed. Grant closed the folder. We will compare the network identifier with the phones collected from Vanessa, Martin, and Nathan. Until then, no assumptions. Richard walked toward the window. Below, employees had begun entering the building. Thousands of people were arriving for a normal workday. unaware that the company had come within hours of being taken through forged papers and a false declaration about its founder. Margaret stood beside him. The board will meet at 9, but the agenda has changed. We disclose the attempted transfer, suspend Charles pending investigation, and appoint an independent committee. Will the company survive the announcement? Yes. How can you be certain? Because the transfers were stopped, the evidence is preserved, and operations are sound. The company is not the people who tried to steal it. Richard looked down at the morning traffic. He had spent years believing his name at the top of the building was what held Whitmore Industries together. Annie had shown him otherwise. A company survived when someone at the lowest level could point toward a hidden danger and the people above her were willing to listen. His phone vibrated with a message from Denise Carter. Annie will not return to work today. She needs time. Richard typed a reply. She should take all the time she needs. Her job and wages are protected. He stopped before sending, then added another sentence. No one from Whitmore Industries will contact her without your permission. He sent the message and placed the phone away. At 9, Richard would face the board and explain how close they had come to losing control of the company. Before that, he asked Margaret for one change to the agenda. What change? I want the first item to address Annie. Margaret studied him. A public reward would create problems for the investigation, not a reward. Protection. No retaliation, no public use of her name, and no attempt to discredit her because she worked in my house. Margaret wrote it at the top of her legal pad. That can be done. Richard looked toward the conference room where Charles had expected to inherit his authority. Then let that be the first decision this board gets right today. At 9 o'clock, the independent directors gathered in the main conference room on the 42nd floor, 2 joined by secure video from out of state. Margaret sat at Richard's right with the emergency filings arranged in front of her. David remained near the door, while Agent Grant waited in another room with his team. Charles's chair was empty. Richard did not begin with the attempted transfer. Before we discuss the company, he said, we need to protect the person who gave us enough warning to stop it. Several directors exchanged uncertain looks. Margaret distributed a 1-page resolution. It prohibited retaliation, public identification, unauthorized contact, or attempts to discredit Annie Carter. It also guaranteed the preservation of her wages while the investigation required her absence from work. One director, Howard Bell, adjusted his glasses. Is this necessary at the board level? She is a household employee, not a company employee. Richard looked across the table. She found forged documents involving this company. The people responsible already sent her a threatening message. Then law enforcement should protect her. They are. We have a separate responsibility. Howard read the resolution again. I am concerned that this may look like compensation for testimony. It is not compensation, Margaret said. It is protection against retaliation. No money beyond her normal wages is being offered. Another director, Elaine Porter, joined from Chicago. Has her name reached the press? Not through us, Margaret said, but several employees know a household worker found the documents. We should assume the story will spread. Elaine signed electronically. Then approve it now. The vote passed without opposition. Richard waited until Margaret recorded the decision. Now we can discuss how close we came to losing control of Whitmore Industries. The screens displayed copies of the forged transfer agreement, the false incapacity letter, the hidden payment list, and the schedule recovered from Martin Hale's files. Margaret explained each stage without revealing evidence investigators had asked them to withhold. When she reached the draft resolution naming Charles acting chairman, Howard removed his glasses. Charles voted to suspend the transfer last night. He did, Margaret said. Why would he stop a plan that benefited him? Because the box had been discovered, Nathan's vehicle had been identified, and investigators were already at the estate. Continuing would have exposed him more quickly. Elaine asked, has he been charged? Not at this time. Then we should be careful about stating conclusions. Richard agreed. We will state verified facts. Charles communicated with Nathan after the emergency vote. Deleted messages show he discussed the incapacity letter with Martin and expected to become acting chairman. He is entitled to respond through counsel. Until then, he cannot remain in a position that gives him access to this board. Margaret presented a second resolution suspending Charles from all committees and restricting his access to company systems pending independent review. This vote also passed. The board then appointed Elaine to chair a special committee composed of directors with no connection to Langford Capital, Nathan, Vanessa, or Martin. Outside counsel and an independent forensic firm would report directly to the committee rather than Richard. Howard looked toward him. You are giving up control of the investigation. I am removing the argument that I shaped it to protect myself. That may be prudent, but it also limits what you can see. I have seen enough hidden information for 1 week. No one challenged the answer. By 11, the company issued a short statement confirming an attempted fraudulent transfer had been stopped. It did not name Annie, Vanessa, Nathan, Martin, or Charles. It stated that operations remained stable and that Whitmore Industries was cooperating with authorities. Richard returned to his office after the meeting. A tray of breakfast biscuits and fruit had been left untouched near the conference room. He took 1 biscuit and carried it to his desk, though he had little appetite. Margaret followed him. The legal work is moving, she said. The company is secure. You should go home. Home is an active crime scene. Then go somewhere that does not contain a conference table. Richard sat. What happens to Vanessa now? Her attorney has arranged temporary housing. Investigators are retaining her phone under a warrant. She has not been charged yet. Has she spoken? Only through counsel. And Nathan? He was transferred to federal custody this morning. Martin remains with local authorities until jurisdiction is settled. Richard broke the biscuit in half without eating it. Annie received a threat because she warned me. Yes. I told Denise no one would contact her without permission. That was appropriate. I also want to pay her college tuition. Margaret did not respond immediately. Richard looked up. You think I should not? I think you should not offer it today. Why? Because she is a witness in a financial fraud case involving your wife and company. A large payment now would be used against her. She should not lose her future because she protected mine. She should not have her credibility damaged because you acted out of guilt. Richard set the biscuit down. It is not guilt. It is partly guilt. He did not deny it. Margaret sat across from him. Ask yourself what you knew about Annie before yesterday. She worked at the estate. What else? She is 18. What does she want to study? Richard had no answer. Does she plan to attend college? Has she applied? Does she even want money from you? You are trying to solve the discomfort of not knowing her by deciding what her future should be. Richard looked toward the window. I want to help. Then begin by listening. Not today. Give her time. Let the investigation establish that she acted before any offer existed. Later, if assistance is appropriate, we structure it openly and independently. Richard nodded, though the delay frustrated him. At noon, Denise called Mrs. Brooks and agreed that Annie could meet Detective Bennett at the Carter apartment to provide her phone for a deeper examination. Richard was not included in the arrangement. That afternoon, the first online report appeared. Billionaire's wife questioned after hidden documents found in Charlotte estate. The article did not name Annie, but it referred to a young member of the domestic staff. Comments appeared within minutes. Some praised the unnamed worker. Others claimed she had planted the papers, misunderstood a private conversation, or hoped for a reward. Richard read only a few before closing the page. At the Carter apartment, Annie sat beside her mother while Detective Bennett copied the threatening message and examined the voicemail log. Do you recognize the number? Bennett asked. No. Has anyone from the estate contacted you since you left? Mrs. Brooks called to make sure I was home. Mr. Whitmore sent a message through my mother saying my job was protected. Anyone else? Annie shook her head. Bennett placed the phone on the table. The message was intended to frighten you. Do not respond. Do not delete anything. If another one arrives, call me. Denise crossed her arms. Will this follow her to school or work? It may become public, but we will not release her name. That is not what I asked. Bennett understood. I cannot promise people will behave well. I can promise we will document threats and respond to them. Annie looked at the detective. Did I cause all of this? No. If I had not lifted the paper, the forged documents already existed. The plan already existed. You did not create the crime by finding it. After Bennett left, Denise heated leftover chicken and rice. Annie remained at the table with the newspaper article open on her phone. Stop reading the comments, Denise said. They are talking about me without knowing who I am. People often speak most confidently when they know the least. Annie closed the page. Her backpack rested beside the refrigerator. The university acceptance letter was still inside, along with the notice explaining that her place could be reconsidered the following year. if she reapplied for financial aid. She took out the letter and unfolded it. Denise watched her. "You thinking about school?" "I was thinking about how quickly one night can change everything. One night does not decide everything. It changed Mr. Whitmore's company. It revealed what was already happening." Annie read the final paragraph again. Denise placed the plates on the table. "You still have to decide what happens next in your own life. Do not let their crime become the only important thing that ever happened to you." At Whitmore Industries, Margaret entered Richard's office carrying another recovered document. "The forensic team found the proposed sale list," she said. Richard took it. 3 manufacturing divisions, 2 distribution centers, and a trucking subsidiary were marked for sale within 6 months of his removal. Beside each asset was an estimated commission payable to Langford Capital. Thousands of jobs had been reduced to percentages on a page. Richard reached the final line. The Myers Park estate was listed separately. Proposed private sale after medical transfer. He looked up. "They planned to sell the house after sending me away." Margaret nodded. "And the estate trust created for Ethan?" "The forged amendments would have removed most of its protections." Richard placed the paper down. Until that moment, the conspiracy had felt like an attack on his authority. Now he understood that it would have reached beyond him, through the company, the employees, and the future he intended to leave behind. He picked up his phone but did not call Annie. Instead, he called Mrs. Brooks. "When Annie is ready to return," he said, "I want to speak with her." Mrs. Brooks answered carefully. "I will tell her you asked. She will decide when she is ready." Richard accepted the condition. For the first time since the rug had been lifted, he understood that gratitude did not give him the right to summon her. Listening had to begin before Annie entered the room. Annie returned to the Whitmore estate the following Monday. Mrs. Brooks met her at the staff entrance shortly before 8 and handed her a clean apron. Though the house no longer followed its usual schedule, the red rug had been removed from the study. Investigators had finished processing the floor, and a contractor was scheduled to seal the hidden compartment after the court released it. Until then, the iron hatch remained exposed beneath a clear protective cover. "You are not assigned to the study," Mrs. Brooks said. "No one is." "That's fine. You may work in the dining room and library. If reporters call the house, you do not answer questions. If someone you do not recognize asks for you, come find me." Annie tied the apron behind her waist. "Has anyone else received messages?" "Not that I know of." The prepaid phone that sent the threat had been linked to a small device recovered from Vanessa's handbag. Investigators had not yet announced whether she sent the message herself or allowed someone else to use the phone. Either possibility made Annie uncomfortable, but the unmarked security vehicle outside her apartment had been removed after 3 quiet nights. Richard arrived at the estate just after 9. He had spent the morning at Whitmore Industries approving an independent compliance review. When he saw Annie arranging clean glasses in the dining room, he stopped at the doorway. "Mrs. Brooks said you were ready to return. I needed to come back sometime. You did not need to come back this soon. I didn't want the last thing I remembered about this house to be police carrying evidence through it." Richard understood. "May I speak with you when you finish?" Annie glanced toward Mrs. Brooks. The older woman answered before Richard could misunderstand the hesitation. "She will come when her work allows." Richard accepted the correction. "Of course." Annie entered his study 20 minutes later. The room looked larger without the rug. Dust marks showed where the furniture had stood before investigators moved it, and the uncovered hatch interrupted the oak floor beside the desk. Richard remained on the other side of the room rather than asking her to approach the place where the discovery occurred. "I wanted to thank you properly. You already thanked me. I acknowledged what you found. That is not the same thing." Annie waited. "I also want to apologize for the way I responded when you first entered this room. I questioned your right to speak before I questioned what was beneath the floor. You were protecting your wife. I was protecting the position she held in my life. I treated that position as more credible than the details you gave me." Annie looked at the uncovered floor. "I knew you might not believe me. That is the part I cannot dismiss." "What do you mean?" "You entered this room expecting that my wife's word would matter more than yours, even before she spoke." Annie answered carefully. "That happens in a lot of rooms." Richard did not attempt to tell her that his was different. "The board approved protections for you," he said. "Your name will not be released by the company, and no employee may contact you about the case or retaliate against you." "That helps. It should have been normal policy before this happened." He picked up a folder but did not offer it to her. "Whitmore Industries is conducting a complete review of how warnings are handled. The review will include household staff, vendors, temporary employees, and junior corporate workers. Annie looked surprised. Because of me? Because a company that ignores information based on who delivers it is not secure. The following morning, Richard met with Elaine Porter, Margaret Ellis, department leaders, and an outside compliance team. The first report showed that the conspiracy succeeded for as long as it did because several systems depended on trust without verification. Martin Hale could access archived signatures without a second approval. Vanessa could authorize estate vendors through a foundation account. Temporary camera credentials remained active after work ended. Senior names moved through the system without the same questions applied to ordinary employees. Elaine placed the report on the table. This was not one broken lock. It was a hallway of open doors. Howard Bell turned several pages. We can correct the technical controls. That does not mean we need to describe the entire company as defective. No one called the company defective, Margaret said. We are identifying why dishonest people found room to operate. Howard pointed toward a recommendation requiring employees to question unusual instructions regardless of executive rank. This could slow decisions. Every assistant will begin challenging authority to protect themselves. Richard answered. Then managers will learn to explain important decisions. We employ thousands of people. We cannot invite every worker to second-guess leadership. A warning is not insubordination. Sometimes it is. Then the evidence will determine which one it is. Elaine moved the meeting forward. The reforms included dual approval for major ownership transfers, independent verification of executive signatures, immediate expiration of contractor credentials, protected reporting channels, and penalties for retaliation. The final proposal required training on how race, age, accent, job title, and income could influence whether a warning was taken seriously. Howard objected again. This is a financial control failure. Why are we turning it into a social issue? Richard looked across the table. Because when Annie entered my study, the first argument against her was not about evidence. It was that she was an 18-year-old housemaid accusing my wife. That happened in your home, not this office. It also happens here. Employees with impressive titles receive the benefit of explanation. People cleaning our floors are expected to prove they deserve to be heard before anyone asks what they saw. Howard remained quiet. Another director, Patricia Monroe, spoke from the end of the table. I have done that. Everyone turned toward her. She continued. Last year, a cafeteria worker told me someone was entering the executive dining area after hours. I asked her supervisor to remind the staff not to spread rumors. Security later discovered a vendor using the room to remove unopened supplies. What happened to the worker? Elaine asked. I do not know. The admission changed the room more than a prepared presentation could have. Richard closed the report. Then the policy must also require follow-up. A person who raises a concern should not disappear from the process once management takes the information. The board approved the reforms that afternoon. Later that week, Annie was invited to speak privately with the compliance team. Richard did not attend. Margaret explained that Annie was not being asked to design corporate policy, only to describe why she almost remained silent. Annie sat across from two consultants and Carla Benton, an internal audit manager. What made you hesitate? Carla asked. Mrs. Whitmore had told us not to touch the rug. Was that the only reason? No. What else? Annie folded her hands. I thought that if I was wrong, no one would remember that I was trying to help. They would remember that I entered a private room and touched something expensive. One consultant wrote the answer down. Did you believe your race affected that fear? Yes. How? Annie chose her words slowly. I knew some people would find it easier to believe I wanted money or stole a document than to believe I noticed something they missed. Carla asked. What would have made it easier to report what you found? A person I could speak to without asking permission from the person I was reporting. The consultants exchanged a glance. That sounds obvious when you say it, one admitted. It was obvious from where I was standing. When the interview ended, Carla walked Annie to the elevator. You are planning to study finance? I hope to. Why finance? Because numbers leave patterns. People can argue about motives, but patterns are harder to explain away. Carla gave her a business card. This is not a job offer, and it is not connected to your testimony. When the case is finished and you are ready, call me. I can explain what internal auditors actually do. Annie accepted the card. At the estate, workers sealed the hidden compartment and replaced the damaged boards. Richard instructed them not to bring the red rug back. Mrs. Brooks watched the last section of oak settle into place. "Are you planning to leave the floor bare?" she asked. "Yes. People may ask why. Then I will tell them." The contractor packed his tools and left. Late afternoon light reached across the uncovered wood, showing the slight difference between the repaired section and the older floor. Richard considered staining it to match, then decided against it. The room did not need to pretend nothing had happened. Some warnings deserved to remain visible. The investigation continued through winter. Vanessa, Nathan, Martin, and Charles were formally charged after the recovered messages, financial records, and forged documents were presented to a federal grand jury. None of them admitted full responsibility. Each claimed someone else had designed the plan, but the evidence showed that all four expected to benefit from Richard's removal. Annie was called twice to meet with prosecutors. Both interviews took place in a conference room at the federal building in uptown Charlotte. Denise sat beside her, and Detective Bennett remained near the door. The questions stayed focused on the afternoon Annie found the hatch and the call she recorded that evening. "Did Mr. Whitmore promise you money before you entered his study?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Did anyone at Whitmore Industries offer you employment?" "No." "Had you ever spoken with Richard Whitmore about college?" "No." "Why did you take the paper?" "Because it was caught in the metal seam, and I could see his company's name on it." "Why did you record Mrs. Whitmore?" "Because what she said matched the paper I had found." The prosecutor closed her folder. "That is all I need today." Outside the room, Denise waited until they reached the elevator before speaking. "They asked the same questions last time. They need the answers on record. They also need to prove you did not invent this for a reward." Annie pressed the elevator button. "I know." Denise looked at her daughter. "Knowing why they ask does not make it easier." "No, but answering the same way helps." By spring, the criminal cases had not reached trial, but the court had frozen the defendants' accounts and restricted their access to Whitmore Industries. Vanessa lived in a rented townhouse under conditions set by the court. Richard communicated with her only through attorneys. At the estate, the household settled into a smaller routine. Richard no longer hosted large foundation dinners. He ate most evenings in the breakfast room and began leaving the office early 2 days a week. The silence in the house remained, but it no longer felt arranged for appearances. One April afternoon, Mrs. Brooks asked Annie to take a folder to the study. Richard stood near the uncovered section of oak floor, examining a framed document on the wall. It was the torn transfer page Annie had found, reproduced from the evidence file. The original remained with federal investigators. Beneath the frame was a small brass plaque. "Truth often begins with the detail everyone else steps over." Annie read the words. "You displayed it. I almost covered the floor again," Richard said. "Then I decided the room had hidden enough." She placed the folder on his desk. "Mrs. Brooks said you needed this." "Thank you. There is something else I wanted to discuss, but only if you have time. My shift ends in 20 minutes. This will not take that long." Richard opened a drawer and removed a white envelope. He placed it on the desk between them. Annie did not touch it. "What is that?" "A check." Her expression changed immediately. Richard noticed. "It is enough to cover your university tuition and living expenses." Annie stepped back from the desk. "I can't accept it. You have not even looked at the amount. The amount is not the problem. Annie, you protected this company from losses that would have reached billions of dollars." "I told the truth, and that truth deserves recognition." She shook her head. "If I take money from you while the case is still open, Vanessa's lawyers will say I expected to be paid. Margaret can prepare documents explaining that it is a gift. They will still say it." Richard rested one hand beside the envelope. "You should not have to give up college because other people may lie about your motives." "I'm not giving it up. You postponed it." "Yes, but I will find another way." "You already found a way to protect my future. Let me protect yours." The words sounded reasonable when Richard spoke them, but Annie did not move closer. "I do not want anyone to say the truth had a price." Richard said nothing. Annie continued, "When I entered this room, I had no idea whether you would believe me. I knew I could lose my job. If I accept a private check now, people can turn everything I did into a transaction. That would not make it true. It would make it easier for them to say." Richard looked at the envelope, then removed it from the desk. "I thought helping immediately was the right thing. It might help you feel better immediately." The answer was respectful, but direct enough to stop him. Richard placed the check back in the drawer. "You are right." Annie had expected resistance. His agreement left her uncertain. "You're not angry?" No. I am embarrassed that I nearly made the same mistake again. What mistake? Deciding what you needed before asking what you wanted. He closed the drawer. What do you want, Annie? She considered the question. I want to go to college without my mother working double shifts. I want to study finance. I want a chance to learn how companies actually protect themselves from people who know how to use the rules against them. Would you consider an internship at Whitmore Industries? Would I be selected because I found the box? That is why I thought of you. It should not be the reason you are hired. Annie nodded. Then I would consider applying. Richard understood the distinction. That evening, he called Margaret and explained the conversation. You offered her the check? Margaret asked. Yes. And she refused? Yes. I warned you. You did. What did she say? She said she did not want anyone claiming the truth had a price. Margaret remained quiet before answering. She understands the case better than some attorneys. Richard sat in the study, the framed copy of the forged document visible across the room. There must be a proper way to help her. There is, but it cannot be a private payment tied to her testimony. What do you recommend? An independently administered educational trust. Fully disclosed, legally documented, and established only after prosecutors confirm it will not affect the case. The trustees, not you, approve payments directly to the university. Can it cover housing and books? Yes. And an internship? Separate process. She applies, meets the academic requirements, and interviews with managers who are not under your control. I want her to have a real opportunity. Then do not give her a decorative position. I would not. You might without intending to. Gratitude can become another form of control. Richard accepted the warning. Over the following weeks, Margaret worked with an outside education foundation to create a scholarship that could not be withdrawn according to Richard's mood or the company's publicity needs. Annie's name would not be used in advertising. The award would cover tuition, housing, books, and basic living expenses, but the foundation would administer every payment. Denise reviewed the documents with a lawyer from a community legal clinic before Annie signed anything. At their kitchen table, she turned to the final page. There is no promise that you will work for Whitmore after graduation. No. No requirement that you speak publicly about what happened. No. And no condition tied to Vanessa's case. The lawyer confirmed that. Denise placed the pen beside Annie. Then the decision is yours. Annie signed. That summer, she reapplied to the university and received a new enrollment date for August. She also completed an application for Whitmore Industries' paid internship program. Carla Benton interviewed her without Richard in the room. Finding the hatch shows you are observant, Carla said. It does not prove you understand accounting. I know. Why should I choose you over someone who has already completed a year of college? You may not choose me this year, but I would rather earn a position later than receive one now because Mr. Whitmore feels grateful. Carla closed the application. That may be the strongest answer you could have given. Annie received a place in the following summer's internship class, contingent on completing her first year of college with the required grades. When Richard heard, he did not call Carla to thank her or ask why she had made the decision. He sent Annie a handwritten note through Mrs. Brooks. I can open a door. I will not insult you by pretending I can do the walking. Annie read the sentence twice before placing the note inside her university acceptance letter. In August, Denise drove her to campus in the same compact sedan that had carried her away from the Whitmore estate on the night of the discovery. The trunk held 2 suitcases, a desk lamp, bedding, and a small box of kitchen supplies Mrs. Brooks insisted every student needed. Before Annie entered the residence hall, Denise took both her hands. You know why you are here? Because I found the rug? No. Denise shook her head. You are here because you earned admission before you ever entered that study. Do not let anyone confuse the event that opened the door with the work that prepared you to walk through it. Annie carried the first suitcase toward the building. The hidden box had changed the direction of her life, but it would not be allowed to define its limits. The following summer, Annie entered Whitmore Industries through the public lobby wearing a navy blazer, low black shoes, and an identification badge marked Summer Intern. She arrived 20 minutes early and waited near the security desk rather than calling Richard or asking for special access. Carla Benton met her at 8. You found the building, Carla said. I came here once for an interview. Finding the lobby is the easiest assignment you will receive. Carla led her to the internal audit department on the 27th floor. The office contained rows of ordinary workstations, filing cabinets, and glass meeting rooms. No one applauded when Annie entered. Most employees barely looked up from their screens. Carla introduced her to the team. This is Annie Carter. She is assigned to vendor reconciliation and invoice review. She reports to me, not to Mr. Whitmore. And she follows the same rules as every other intern. A man near the printer glanced at Annie's badge. Is she the one from the rug story? Carla answered before Annie had to. She is the intern assigned to vendor reconciliation. That is all anyone here needs for today. Annie sat at a desk between two other students. One studied accounting at Wake Forest. The other attended North Carolina State and had already completed an internship with a regional bank. Their first assignment involved matching purchase orders with payments made to maintenance companies. The work was slow and required patience. Annie checked vendor names, invoice dates, approval codes, and tax numbers. Nothing about it resembled the night she ran into Richard's study. By the third week, one of the interns asked why she continued checking entries after the software marked them as approved. Because approval only tells us someone clicked the button, Annie said. It doesn't tell us whether the information deserved approval. The other intern smiled. That sounds like something from compliance training. It sounds like what happened to this company. Annie found the irregularity on a Thursday afternoon. 3 maintenance vendors had similar names: Piedmont Facility Services, Piedmont Facilities Group, and Piedmont Service Partners. Each received small monthly payments for work at different distribution centers. The amounts were low enough to avoid automatic review. Annie compared their tax records and found that 2 used the same mailing address. The third listed a post office box but shared the same bank routing information. She printed the records and took them to Carla. I may be wrong, Annie said, but these companies appear separate only on paper. Carla reviewed the pages. What did you check? Tax numbers, payment accounts, approval dates, and addresses. The invoices are signed by different supervisors, but the electronic submissions come from the same device. Did you contact any of the supervisors? No. I thought I should bring it to you first. Carla nodded. Good. An auditor verifies before accusing. The company opened a limited review. The vendors were controlled by one former contractor who had submitted duplicate invoices under different names. The scheme was unrelated to Vanessa, Nathan, or Martin, but it had cost Whitmore Industries nearly $400,000 over 3 years. At the next department meeting, Carla presented the findings. Annie identified the pattern, she said. She documented it, avoided assumptions, and followed the reporting process. Several employees congratulated her afterward. The man who had called her the one from the rug story approached last. I suppose you have a talent for finding things under other things. Annie closed her notebook. I have a habit of checking what people expect no one to check. He appeared unsure whether she was joking. Richard learned about the investigation only after the contractor's accounts were frozen. He asked Carla whether Annie had received special assistance. No, Carla said. She performed the work expected of an intern. Was the assignment too easy? It was routine work. She treated it as if routine work mattered. Richard smiled. My father used to say large losses begin as small numbers no one respects. Carla gathered her files. Small warnings are ignored for the same reason small people are ignored. Richard recognized Annie's influence in the sentence. He did not summon her to the executive floor. Instead, he sent a short note through Carla. Well done. Continue following the process. Annie kept the note but did not display it at her desk. The criminal cases moved forward during her second year of college. Nathan and Martin entered guilty pleas after prosecutors presented the financial records and recovered messages. Charles accepted a separate agreement that required restitution and barred him from serving as an officer or director of a public company. Vanessa continued to deny planning the entire scheme, but she eventually admitted authorizing the hidden compartment, using forged documents, and arranging the attempted removal of the box. The court imposed a prison sentence, restitution, and restrictions on future financial activity. Richard did not attend every hearing. He submitted statements through Margaret and appeared only when required. He refused interviews about the marriage. When reporters asked whether he felt vindicated, he answered, "Accountability is not the same as satisfaction." Annie completed 3 more summer placements at Whitmore Industries. She worked in internal audit, compliance, and regional operations. Each year, she received ordinary evaluations listing both strengths and weaknesses. Her first review praised her attention to detail but noted that she sometimes avoided speaking until she had checked a problem too many times. Carla discussed it with her. You do not need perfect certainty before asking a question. I know what happens when a question is wrong, and what happens when the question comes too late. Annie understood the point. During her final internship, she led a small review team for a warehouse inventory project. She learned to assign work, explain decisions, and accept corrections without treating them as attacks. 4 years after the red rug was lifted, Annie graduated with honors in finance and business administration. The ceremony took place on a warm May morning. Denise sat between Mrs. Brooks and Richard in the crowded university arena. Margaret and Carla sat one row behind them. Mrs. Brooks carried a folded handkerchief in her purse and used it before Annie's name was announced. I am not crying, she said. Denise smiled. Then your eyes are celebrating. Richard applauded when Annie crossed the stage, but he did not stand until Denise did. This day did not belong to Whitmore Industries. After the ceremony, Annie met them beneath a row of flowering trees outside the arena. Denise held her for several seconds before allowing anyone else near. Mrs. Brooks adjusted the graduation hood that had shifted across Annie's shoulder. You have been crooked since the stage, she said. I was trying not to trip. You did not. That is what matters. Richard waited until the others finished. Congratulations. Thank you. He handed her a small envelope. Annie raised an eyebrow. There isn't a check inside, is there? No. Margaret would stop me before I reached the parking lot. Inside was a formal letter confirming that Annie had earned a place in Whitmore Industries' Management Development Program. The selection had been made by an independent panel after interviews, academic review, and internship evaluations. The letter also stated that she would rotate through finance, compliance, operations, and community investment before being considered for a permanent management role. Annie read the final page. You did not sign it. Carla and the selection committee did. Did you know before today? I knew you were a finalist. They informed me after the decision was recorded. Annie folded the letter. I received another offer. Richard nodded. Carla told me. You are not going to ask which company? You will tell me if you want me to know. Denise watched the exchange without speaking. Annie had received an offer from a bank in Atlanta with a higher starting salary. For several weeks, she considered leaving Charlotte so her career would not always be connected to the Whitmore family. What would you do if I chose the other company? She asked. Congratulate you. And the scholarship? It paid for your education. It did not purchase your future. Annie looked at the letter again. I want to work where people understand why controls fail, not only how to repair them afterward. Does that mean you are accepting? It means I am still deciding. Richard smiled. That is a responsible answer. 2 weeks later, Annie accepted the Whitmore position. Her decision came with one condition. She would report through the established management program and receive no private assignments from Richard. The company agreed. Before her first official day, Mrs. Brooks invited Annie back to the estate for lunch. Richard was waiting in the study, but the room no longer looked the way Annie remembered it. The red rug was gone. The repaired oak floor remained uncovered. A model of Richard's father's first delivery truck sat on a shelf, and a framed photograph of Denise, Mrs. Brooks, and Annie at graduation rested beside the window. On the wall hung the reproduced transfer page. Beneath it, the brass plaque remained. Truth often begins with the detail everyone else steps over. Richard stood when Annie entered. 4 years earlier, she had come into the same room wearing an apron, holding a tea tray, and wondering whether she would be dismissed before she could finish a sentence. Now she carried an employee folder with her name printed above the words Management Development Associate. Welcome back, Richard said. Annie looked at the uncovered floor. I never really left. No, he answered. But this time, you are entering through a door you chose. Annie's first year in the Management Development Program passed without ceremony. She rotated through finance, regional operations, compliance, and community investment, completing the same reports, evaluations, and presentations required of the other associates. Richard did not call her into private meetings or ask department heads to treat her differently. When their paths crossed, he greeted her as he greeted the others. That distance was deliberate, but it was not cold. It allowed Annie to build a reputation that did not depend on the night she lifted the red rug. At the end of the year, Carla Benton recommended Annie for a permanent position in operational risk. The role required reviewing problems that moved between departments, where responsibility was often unclear and warnings were most likely to be ignored. "You will not be popular every day," Carla told her. "I don't think that was included in the job description. It is included in every job that requires asking people why they approved something." Annie accepted. Several months later, Richard invited her family and a small group of employees to the Myers Park estate on a Saturday afternoon. There were no reporters, investors, or photographers. Folding tables stood beneath the oak trees behind the house, covered with simple white cloths. Mrs. Brooks supervised trays of grilled chicken, corn on the cob, macaroni and cheese, garden salad, and peach cobbler. Denise arrived carrying a bowl of potato salad despite being told that no one needed to bring food. "I was raised not to arrive at a gathering empty-handed," she told Mrs. Brooks. "You were raised correctly," Mrs. Brooks replied, taking the bowl. Margaret came with David Mercer and several members of the compliance team. Carla brought 3 students who had received educational grants from the independent scholarship program created after Annie's case. The program now supported students from working families studying accounting, logistics, business administration, and public oversight. Richard kept the event informal. He wore a light blue shirt without a tie and spent most of the afternoon speaking with employees rather than standing near the house. The estate no longer hosted the polished foundation events Vanessa once arranged. This gathering felt more like the neighborhood cookouts Richard remembered from the years when his father still drove one of the company's trucks. After lunch, Mrs. Brooks tapped a spoon against her glass. "Mr. Whitmore has been waiting for a chance to speak. Since he paid for the food, we should probably allow it." A few people laughed. Richard stood near the end of the table. "I was told this was not supposed to become a speech." "It is already becoming one," Margaret said. Richard accepted the correction. 4 years ago, Annie protected something I believed was mine. At the time, I thought that meant my company, my house, and the shares carrying my name. I understand now that she protected more than that. He looked toward the employees seated with their families. She protected jobs connected to warehouses, factories, offices, and trucks across several states. She protected the future I intended to leave my family. She also protected the idea that truth should not require a title before anyone listens. Annie sat beside Denise. She had not known Richard planned to speak about her, but he did not turn the gathering into a celebration of his generosity. He spoke about the systems that failed, the people who corrected them, and the responsibility leaders carried when someone with less authority raised a warning. "When Annie entered my study," he continued, "she was afraid. I know that because I made her explain herself before I was willing to examine the floor. Courage did not remove her fear. It simply prevented fear from making the final decision." Mrs. Brooks looked toward Annie. "You should answer him," she said. Annie stood. "I didn't prepare anything." "That has never stopped anyone at this company," Carla said. More laughter moved around the tables. Annie waited until it settled. "I was afraid from the moment I saw the paper until the moment Mr. Whitmore lifted the rug. I was afraid I had misunderstood what I found. I was afraid I would lose my job. I was afraid people would believe I had gone into that room looking for money." She glanced toward Denise. "My mother later told me that doing the right thing does not guarantee people will treat you fairly afterward. She was right. But she also taught me that unfair treatment does not turn silence into the right choice." Several of the scholarship students listened closely. "Courage was not the absence of fear," Annie said. "It was deciding fear did not deserve the final word." Mrs. Brooks raised one finger. "And young people should be taught respect, but adults must never confuse respect with silence." Richard nodded. "That lesson should have been written into our policies long before Annie entered my study." When the gathering ended, Richard asked Annie and Denise to join him inside. Mrs. Brooks came with them, carrying a container of peach cobbler. She insisted Denise take home. They stopped in the study. The repaired oak floor remained uncovered. No rug had been placed over the section where the hatch once stood. The reproduced transfer page still hung on the wall above the brass plaque. A model of the first Whitmore delivery truck rested beside Richard's desk. Its paint was chipped, and one small mirror was missing. Richard had resisted restoring it because his father had driven the real truck in the same condition for years. Someone stood near the bookshelves, holding a small wooden box. Ethan Whitmore had grown taller during Annie's years at college, though the familiar seriousness remained in his face. He had returned from a weekend baseball practice shortly before lunch and waited until the other guests left before approaching her. "This came back from the evidence office last month," he said. He handed her the box. Annie opened it. Inside lay the blue-green glass marble that had rolled beneath the side table 4 years earlier. She lifted it carefully. Light from the window passed through the colored glass and cast a small mark across her palm. "I thought the police kept it," she said. "They did until all the appeals were finished," Richard explained. "Afterward, they released the property." Ethan nodded toward the marble. "You should have it. It was yours. I have the rest of the set." "That isn't the point." He considered that. "If it hadn't rolled toward the rug, we might have lost the house." Richard spoke from behind him. "The marble did not save the house. Annie did." Ethan looked at her. "Then keep it because you listened when nobody else did." Annie closed her fingers around it. "It didn't say anything. It showed you where to look." She smiled. "That is not the same as listening." "It is close." Denise rested one hand on Annie's shoulder. "Take the marble before he develops a longer argument." Annie placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket. Richard walked to the wall and touched the edge of the framed document. "I once thought legacy meant leaving behind property with your name attached to it. What do you think it means now?" Annie asked. "Making certain the next person has a fair chance to do something better with what you built." He looked toward the open study door. "This company still has work to do." "So do I," Annie said. "That is why I am glad you stayed." Annie glanced at him. "I stayed because the position was right for me, not because I owed you." "I know." The answer mattered. They left the study together. Mrs. Brooks went first with Denise, discussing how long the peach cobbler could remain unrefrigerated. Ethan followed them toward the kitchen. Annie stopped at the front door and looked back once. Late sunlight crossed the bare oak floor. There was no rug, no hidden compartment, and no stack of forged documents waiting beneath the place where people walked each day. The repaired boards remained slightly different from the older wood, not enough to damage the room, but enough to show where something had once been concealed. Annie placed one hand over the marble in her pocket. 4 years earlier, she had entered that house wearing an apron and believing people like her survived by keeping their heads down. Now she understood that survival sometimes required the opposite. A person had to notice what others ignored, raise a hand when remaining silent felt safer, and speak before fear found a reason to wait. She stepped through the front door beside her mother. Richard remained in the hallway as they crossed the porch. He no longer saw the young housemaid who had interrupted his work and ordered him to lift a rug. He saw a woman who had earned her education, her position, and the right to decide where her future would lead. The blue-green marble rested in Annie's hand as she walked down the steps. It was small enough to be overlooked. That had never meant it was unimportant. The story reminds us that truth does not become less important because it is spoken by someone young, poor, or easily overlooked. Annie's courage shows that doing the right thing often begins with noticing what others ignore and speaking even when fear makes silence feel safer. Real justice requires more than exposing wrongdoing. It also requires listening without prejudice, protecting those who tell the truth, and giving people a fair chance to build their own future. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.